Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. On an October morning in Scarborough, Canada, a man named Philip Grandin made a frantic 911 call. "My wife is unconscious, she's not breathing," he gasped into the phone, claiming he had just discovered his pregnant wife lying motionless in the bathtub. Initially, the call sounded like any routine emergency, but something in Philip's voice made the dispatcher feel uneasy. Why wasn't he performing CPR? Why did his voice sound too calm, almost indifferent while his wife was supposedly dying? Nothing about the situation was as simple as it appeared, and what unfolded next would send chills down everyone's spine. When police and paramedics arrived at the scene, they found no clear signs of an attack or underlying medical condition. Anna simply lay there in the bathtub. She was gone. How could a healthy pregnant woman suddenly die without any warning signs? From the beginning, everything seemed like a tragic accident. Philip, Anna's husband, had called for help immediately. However, just from one phone call, police quickly sensed something was off. Philip's reaction, his suspiciously calm demeanor, and the contradictory statements throughout the call made investigators unable to ignore their doubts. A husband who had just found his wife dead in the bathtub. Why wasn't he panicking? Why didn't he take the most instinctive actions, like pulling his wife out of the water or attempting CPR when she had stopped breathing? Philip Grandin and Anna were a young married couple living in the peaceful neighborhood of Scarborough, Ontario. Once considered the epitome of perfect love, their love story began like a fairy tale, filled with dreams of a happy family, welcoming their first child, and building a life full of joy. Philip was a charismatic and talented man, known as a dedicated minister and thoughtful husband. Anna was a woman full of life and compassion. When they held their wedding, outsiders only saw a dream couple. Anna once spoke of Philip as her lifelong companion. They had sweet moments together, cozy evenings around the dinner table, romantic getaways, and gentle conversations about the future. Anyone looking at them would think they had everything, a complete family, perfect happiness. However, behind those radiant photos, the truth was completely different. Just 3 months after the wedding, a devastating truth was revealed. Anna discovered Philip had betrayed her with another woman. This wasn't a fleeting affair. The other woman was Anna's close friend, a member of the very church where Philip preached. This betrayal wasn't just emotional, but spiritual, leaving Anna devastated. Yet strangely, Anna didn't harbor hatred. She didn't completely cut ties with Philip. Instead, she chose the path of forgiveness. She desperately wanted to save this marriage, even hoping to help Philip find his way back to righteousness. But could someone like Philip, with all the dark secrets he was hiding, truly change? The marriage seemed to continue, but the cracks had begun to spread beyond concealment. Anna's tolerance wasn't met with any sincere remorse. Philip not only continued his affairs, but also became immersed in vices he carefully hid from his wife's eyes. Particularly his addiction to pornography, something completely contradictory to his lofty sermons from the pulpit, pushed Anna into exhaustion and utter despair. The tension escalated to its peak during marriage counseling sessions. Questions poured down like hail, and though Philip appeared repentant, claiming he wanted to return to morality, he was actually just hiding behind a perfect mask. By October 2011, when Anna's intuition told her that her husband was still maintaining his extramarital affair, she chose to confront him decisively. And from that moment, everything began to spiral into an endless abyss. The life Anna thought she had found completeness in, with peaceful evenings and bright dreams of the future, turned out to be just an illusion. Day by day, it was eroded by deep secrets, clever lies, and hidden actions no one knew about. Anna, in her innocence, had become a victim of the very life she believed had brought her safety and genuine love. But the harsh reality was that what she saw was just a thin veil covering a dangerous relationship. From an outsider's perspective, no one could imagine that the relationship between Philip and Anna harbored such fear and oppression. They were a young newlywed couple building their own home in Scarborough, a place where anyone would long to find peace and happiness. However, only those truly close could sense that behind the bright smiles and loving vows was a suffocating pressure that Philip was gradually tightening around Anna. Philip, the man everyone admired for his appearance as a devoted and caring husband, was actually a terrifying tyrant. He wasn't simply a life partner, but a guard watching Anna's every breath. This relationship had transformed into an unequal battle. where love gave way to absolute domination. And Anna, instead of being herself, had become a soulless puppet in Philip's controlling hands. Among the most frightening behaviors Anna had to endure, Philip's interference in her social life was perhaps the most silent pain. He forbade her from meeting friends, from going out without his approval. Every time Anna dared to plan a date or an outing, Philip would become like a haunting ghost, constantly calling and texting, interrogating every detail about where she was, what she was doing, and with whom. If Anna was slow to respond, his rage would descend with threats, plunging her into overwhelming guilt and fear. But even more terrifying was how Philip had turned control into a refined art. From work to the most private hobbies, nothing escaped his watchful eye. He monitored her like a detective, ordering her to do this, forbidding her from doing that, even depriving her of activities she loved. All because he wanted her to belong completely to him, never to be away even for a moment. This was no longer love but cruel possession, where Anna completely lost her autonomy and the right to decide her own fate. But the phone calls and text messages were just the beginning of another series of frightening behaviors. Every time they traveled together, Philip turned his car into a dangerously psychological weapon. When tensions arose, he would accelerate frantically or suddenly slam the brakes, forcing Anna to grip her seat in terror. The car was no longer an ordinary means of transportation, but had become a tool of cruel punishment whenever Anna dared to act in ways that displeased him. However, Philip's tyrannical control went even deeper, straight into Anna's body and soul. Every time Anna tried to refuse Philip's sexual demands, he never accepted that refusal, but continued to force her with disgusting cruelty. Even though Anna was pregnant, even though she had just undergone painful surgeries and needed time to recover, Philip still callously demanded she comply with all his wishes, never caring about his wife's health or emotions. Anna's close friends later recounted that in private conversations, Anna had repeatedly confided that she felt like she had married an emotionless person, even a psychopath. To those around them, these complaints were just ordinary frustrations any wife might have in married life. But they failed to realize that those words were actually desperate cries for help, a warning sign no one noticed until it was too late. Philip's true behavior began to emerge frighteningly when Anna felt suffocated in the very house she called home. The relationship she once believed would bring love and protection had turned into an inescapable nightmare. Every time Anna wanted to step outside, even just to meet friends or simply go shopping, Philip would become a harsh prosecutor, questioning every detail, demanding she report meticulously on everything, including her expected return time. Day by day, Anna felt herself dissolving. She was no longer herself, but had become a ghost in a life that didn't belong to her. A life completely orchestrated by Philip, where every decision, every action was closely monitored and controlled by the very man she had once given her complete trust. The incident began with an emergency call on the morning of October 17, 2011, when Philip Grandine, appearing panicked, called 911 to report that his wife Anna had stopped breathing and was lying unconscious in the bathtub. He claimed to have discovered this condition after returning from a jog. However, his voice, though seeming worried, strangely lacked the grief emotions a normal husband should have. This immediately made investigators feel something was wrong. At the scene, investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies in Philip's statements. His cold attitude and lack of urgency in such a serious situation had police officers beginning to ask doubtful questions. Why didn't he try to save his wife? Why didn't he show any grief over the death of his pregnant wife? While Philip repeatedly insisted he couldn't lift his wife out of the bathtub because her body was too slippery, investigators began to dig deeper for evidence. They quickly discovered that many details in Philip's story didn't match reality. Most suspicious was that despite having medical training, Philip couldn't perform the most basic first aid, like CPR, a skill anyone in the medical field should master instinctively. Just hours after Anna was taken to the hospital, investigators conducted an autopsy and confirmed the cause of death was drowning. However, Anna's death still contained mysteries that couldn't be explained by a simple accident. Though there were no obvious wounds on her body, some suspicious signs gradually emerged. Particularly noteworthy during medical analysis, doctors discovered traces of lorazepam in Anna's blood, a powerful sedative completely not recommended for pregnant women due to the potential for serious side effects. When police dug into Anna's phone data, a frightening discovery emerged. Just 3 days before her death, she had been hospitalized with unusual symptoms of fatigue and dizziness. In a call with her sister, Anna had confided that she felt unwell after drinking a smoothie prepared by Philip himself. Even more terrifying was Philip's attitude when Anna asked for an explanation about her unusual condition. Instead of showing concern like a loving husband, he completely refused to provide any useful information. This indifference and silence became an important clue, suggesting that Philip not only knew beforehand about the effects of what Anna had consumed, but may have been carefully preparing for this terrifying plan for a long time. When police questioned Philip about what type of medication Anna might have used, he continuously denied and showed suspiciously evasive behavior. However, when investigators analyzed the browsing history on Philip's computer, chilling truths began to be revealed. One of his most recent searches was a question about the dangerous dosage of lorazepam. The haunting question arose: why would a husband need to know this information, unless he had secretly been preparing a sinister plan targeting his wife's life? The deeper police went into the investigation, the more frightening details they discovered. Philip didn't just stop at searching for information about sedatives and how to use them. They also uncovered other strange and suspicious behaviors. On the morning of October 14, 2011, exactly when Anna was lying unconscious in the hospital, Philip had secretly searched for escort services. This happened before he called 911 and reported having discovered his wife lying motionless in the bathtub. This suspicious coincidence exposed Philip's true nature, a cold, calculating person completely lacking compassion, even in the moments when his wife was between life and death. All these clues converged on one haunting conclusion. Anna's death was not an unusual accident, but a premeditated murder orchestrated with sinister precision. Philip Grandine, despite bearing the title of loving husband and devout Catholic, had coldly planned and executed his wife's death with terrifying calculation. His motive couldn't be clearer: to escape a marriage that had become a burden and freely pursue life with his lover. The extramarital relationship he had secretly maintained. When the veil of deception was completely lifted, the truth about Philip emerged with all its cruelty. Investigators not only collected undeniable evidence of Anna's death, but also discovered that Philip's actions formed a chain of conspiracy carefully prepared long in advance, not an impulse or unexpected incident. And when all truth was exposed to light, the question was no longer whether Philip was a murderer. A much more frightening question had arisen. How could a human being so easily take the life of his pregnant wife? After all undeniable evidence was collected, the Philip Grandine case entered its decisive phase, the trial. The entire community turned their eyes to the courthouse, waiting for justice to be served and truth to be revealed. However, the journey to bring the killer to light proved more complex and arduous than anyone expected. After being arrested and facing murder charges, Philip stubbornly maintained his unbelievable argument. Anna's death was just a regrettable accident, that she had committed suicide or accidentally drowned. This defense was not only completely unconvincing, but also became a serious insult to those who loved Anna and her family. They couldn't accept that the death of a strong woman, who always loved her family and cherished life, could end with such a meaningless accident. In May 2012, Philip was officially arrested and faced murder charges. However, what outraged public opinion was that despite having sufficient evidence and reports from medical experts and investigators, he was granted the privilege of living at his parents' house under supervision, instead of being detained in jail like other murderers. This unusual favoritism sparked strong waves of questioning about the fairness of the legal system. Could social status and connections buy leniency, even when facing the most serious charges? Or was this just proof that justice could sometimes be distorted by factors beyond the truth? The official trial took place in 2014, nearly 3 years after Anna's death, when the wounds in the hearts of her loved ones were still unhealed. Despite having sufficient evidence to prove Philip had used sedatives to take his wife's life, he stubbornly denied all charges, insisting that Anna's death was unexpected and unintentional. The prosecution laid out before the court a chain of undeniable evidence. From Philip's search for information about lethal dosages of lorazepam before Anna died, to his suspicious actions when he hastily deleted data from his wife's phone and turned off the home security camera system right after she died. Each piece of evidence was like a puzzle piece in a meticulously planned crime. The forensic expert gave a clear conclusion. The dose of sedative in Anna's body exceeded safe levels, reaching potentially fatal amounts. This proved Philip had intentionally used the medication to render Anna unconscious and unable to resist. But the picture of Philip was even darker. Their relationship wasn't just destroyed by betrayal and continuous affairs, but also by the suffocating control and cold indifference he showed Anna. His maintenance of extramarital relationships and complete composure in the face of his wife's death not only exposed moral depravity, but also revealed the cruel nature of someone who only calculated for personal gain, even when it meant stepping over the body of his closest relative. When all clear evidence was presented in court, Anna's family felt a glimmer of hope in their hearts. They hoped for a severe sentence befitting someone who had cruelly taken the life of their most beloved. However, what happened next left them shocked and furious. The trial ended with a verdict many couldn't believe. Philip was only convicted of manslaughter and received a 15-year prison sentence, a punishment far too lenient for the horrific crime he had committed. The moment the verdict was read, Anna's family and the surrounding community were all stunned. They couldn't accept the leniency of the legal system, a system they had once trusted to bring true justice for Anna. While Philip could still look forward to freedom, still had a chance to continue living, Anna was gone forever, leaving wounds that would never heal in the hearts of those who loved her. But the fight for justice didn't end in the courtroom. Anna's family was determined not to give up and continued calling for fairness. They received strong support from the community with protests demanding justice for Anna and condemning the overly lenient sentence for Philip. Their fight wasn't just for Anna, but for all other victims of domestic violence, those living in the shadows of deception and cruelty as Anna had experienced. Although the court's verdict had been issued, questions about justice for domestic violence victims remained open. Anna's family, with community support, persisted in their struggle. They wanted to send a strong message that domestic violence could never be tolerated, that criminals like Philip couldn't escape punishment, no matter how they disguised their true nature. And though the final verdict was announced in 2020 with a 15-year prison sentence, the wounds in Anna's family's hearts would never heal. The Philip Grandin case is closed, but the wounds in the hearts of those who loved Anna continue to bleed. Despite the court's final verdict, her family couldn't find peace in their souls. They not only lost a beloved relative, but also had to witness cleverly woven lies presented before the public. They had exhausted their strength fighting for justice. But perhaps what they longed for most was the truth and sincere apologies from the man Anna had once given her complete love. Philip received a 15-year prison sentence, yet many still felt this punishment was too lenient for what he had done. What's frightening is that Philip never showed genuine remorse, never admitted his actions were intentional murder. Even when asked to apologize to his wife's family, he stubbornly refused. This coldness cut deep into the hearts of Anna's loved ones. These are the unanswered questions Anna's family must carry for life. How could a husband be so heartless? How could a person deceive his wife, deceive his entire family, and even when his wife was dead, still not recognize his own guilt? These questions will forever haunt those who lost Anna, victim of greed, selfishness, and unforgivable actions by someone who had once sworn to love and protect her. With such a relatively light sentence, will Philip truly learn his lesson? Will he repeat these cruel behaviors with other women when freed? These questions don't just plague Anna's family, but worry the entire community. Though the verdict has been announced, the dark secrets in Philip's life, the horrific pain Anna had to endure, have still not been fully exposed. And Anna, the woman who should have enjoyed complete happiness, built a warm family, welcomed her first child, has gone forever before realizing those simple dreams. Her death wasn't a random tragedy, but the inevitable consequence of cruel manipulation, continuous deception, and Philip's stubborn refusal to admit guilt. Story 2. Behind the peaceful facade of Taipei City lies a tragic story of disappearance and crime, and to this day, many questions remain unanswered. The story takes us back to June 2000, to a quiet alley in the Dan district of Taipei, where Zhang Jinghua lived in her apartment, which also served as her English tutoring classroom. After earning her master's degree in England and returning to Taiwan, Ms. Zhang decided to start a small business from home with an English language school. Her classes were well loved by many students, thanks to her approachable and easy-to-understand teaching style. Beyond her steady income from teaching, Ms. Zhang was also quite savvy with investments and financial management. She was an independent, successful woman and the ideal model of a golden girl in modern society. Living alone in a private apartment in the expensive Dan district of Taipei, Ms. Zhang enjoyed a comfortable and fulfilling life. With an independent lifestyle and love for safety, she was very focused on protecting herself. She was passionate about traveling abroad and always carefully prepared every detail for each trip. She was especially close to her family and always notified them in advance whenever she traveled so they could rest easy. On June 14, 2000, after Ms. Zhang's unofficial boyfriend left her home early in the morning, everything seemed normal. However, by noon, her family and friends couldn't reach her, which began to worry them. When her family arrived at her apartment, they saw her shoes still neatly arranged on the rack, but when they rang the doorbell repeatedly with no answer, their anxiety grew. By late evening on the 15th, their concern intensified as they still couldn't contact her, and there was no sign that she had returned home. Unable to wait any longer, the family decided to call the fire department for help, asking them to use a ladder to climb into the house through the window. However, even after getting inside, they couldn't find Ms. Zhang anywhere. More worryingly, her cell phone was also missing, with absolutely no signs indicating that she had voluntarily left. The situation became increasingly serious, leaving her family more confused and fearful for her safety. Upon receiving the report, police immediately arrived at the scene to investigate. They began by checking the front door lock, and the first thing that caught their attention was that the lock was not damaged at all. All signs indicated there was no external interference, suggesting that there had been no break-in or attack from outside. Proceeding inside, police continued to examine the living room. There, they noticed everything was very neat and orderly, with no signs of disturbance. Nothing was broken or improperly cleaned. This further confirmed that no robbery had occurred at the scene, at least not in this area. Police continued to check the other rooms in the apartment. Upon entering Ms. Zhang's bedroom, they found several sets of clothes neatly folded on the bed, but nothing was disturbed or missing. Everything still looked perfectly normal, unlike a break-in or theft. However, the floor had been cleaned too thoroughly to a degree unusual for a normal home. The floor was shining bright, without a speck of dust or any traces, which surprised the police. Of course, this could have been due to Ms. Zhang's living habits, or perhaps she had cleaned thoroughly before leaving home. However, when questioned, Ms. Zhang's family revealed that she never hired cleaning help, which made the police suspicious. Why would someone living alone like Ms. Zhang be able to keep her home this perfectly clean? Especially given that she didn't have the habit of hiring help. As the investigators prepared to enter the bathroom, they suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the balcony. Looking out, they saw a husky running around in circles. As soon as the balcony door was opened, the dog immediately rushed out, then ran into the room and began making strange sounds. However, from the dog's behavior, police noticed its agitation wasn't a sign of an attack, but rather seemed like it was worried or frightened by something. With a gut feeling that something unusual was happening, the investigators decided to carefully examine every detail in the bathroom. They checked each tile, each personal hygiene item, and discovered that all necessary items were present. However, one strange thing was that the bathroom was missing 2 bath towels and a large bottle of shower gel. These were items typically present in any normal bathroom, and their absence raised more suspicion about what had actually happened there. Even more surprising was the presence of an electric fan in the bathroom. Normally, we wouldn't place a fan in a bathroom, as specialized electrical equipment would be used instead, because using electrical devices in a damp environment like a bathroom is very dangerous. Moreover, using a fan to dry the air while bathing could easily cause a cold, which made the investigators even more suspicious. The police found it increasingly strange that this fan was in the bathroom, a detail they had never encountered at similar crime scenes. Next to the dark red bathtub near the wall, there were uneven stains, very different from normal watermarks. This caught the investigators' attention, because if it were a woman bathing, water could splash onto the wall, but it couldn't splash onto this position, the side of the wall. Sensing that something was wrong, the investigators decided to use luminol, a special chemical to detect traces of blood, and the result was shocking. The luminol reaction illuminated blood stains on the floor. One investigator wondered, could Ms. Zhang have been preparing fish, chicken, or duck in the bathroom? But clearly this wasn't an ordinary stain, but rather a very suspicious, abnormal sign. To observe more closely, the investigators used different light sources, illuminating the bathroom from various angles. At this point, blood stains began to appear clearly on the bathtub. Looking deeper inside, they discovered the bathtub full of blood, which had overflowed and dripped onto the floor. The blood drops from the bathtub continued to flow down to the toilet base. Because the toilet was dark red in color, A large patch of blood was very difficult to see with the naked eye. However, with the help of luminol and light from different angles, the investigators realized this was a very large and clear blood trace. Not only that, at the sink, police discovered more blood stains. The bathtub, toilet, and sink all had blood traces, and the floor was also scattered with small blood spots. When investigators continued to use luminol, strangely, the entire wall in the bathroom also turned green. This could be explained by blood getting on a cleaning cloth, which was then used to wipe the walls, creating such large blood streaks. This further reinforced the suspicion that the scene had been deliberately cleaned to conceal evidence. The investigators, with meticulous care, carefully marked each spot with blood and recorded all the details. After compiling, they created a diagram of the blood distribution at the scene, and a total of 107 blood spots were discovered. Blood samples were then taken from Ms. Zhang's parents for testing. The forensic results showed it was Ms. Zhang's blood. All of these signs led to an undeniable conclusion. Something horrific had happened in this very bathroom. On the bathroom floor, there was an electric fan, an item not typically found in bathrooms. This led the task force to suspect that the perpetrator may have used the electric fan to dry the floor after cleaning up the crime scene. Additionally, the victim's family reported that a shower curtain had also disappeared. The question arose, had the perpetrator used this shower curtain to wrap Ms. Zhang's body in order to conceal evidence and hide what had happened? However, all of these suspicions were still just speculation, without concrete proof. Because aside from the obvious blood stains, the task force found no other traces such as bones, tissue fragments, or human body matter in the bathroom. The only thing they could be certain of at this point was that Ms. Zhang's disappearance was far from simple. The ominous signs, the absence of a body, and the strange items at the scene made the investigators feel that this case was definitely connected to a serious criminal act, not just an ordinary missing person case. If Ms. Zhang disappeared so mysteriously, then the perpetrator was very likely someone she knew. Because when police entered the house, they noticed everything was neat and orderly, as if it had been deliberately cleaned up. The cleanliness and order in the home made them suspect that someone close to her had tampered with the crime scene. So who was this acquaintance? Could it have been Ms. Zhang's boyfriend? Ms. Zhang had a boyfriend she had known for a long time, and initially, this was a possibility that police considered. However, after conducting a thorough investigation, police ruled out his involvement in the case. Ms. Zhang enjoyed socializing with friends, was well-educated, had a refined demeanor, and dressed fashionably. Although she had a boyfriend since they weren't married, she still attracted many suitors. To clarify the relationships surrounding Ms. Zhang, police invited all the men and women who had been in contact with her recently to come in for questioning. When checking Ms. Zhang's call log, they discovered that the last person to contact her before she disappeared was a man named Li Yonghui. Police contacted this man and asked him to come to the police station to clarify the matter. Although an appointment had been scheduled, he repeatedly failed to show up. One investigator stated that in principle, Mr. Li always cooperated when requested, but every time police arranged an appointment, he cited being busy as an excuse. Police scheduled meetings with him twice, but neither was successful. When asked to come in on a specific day, he told police he would come the following day. However, when the next day arrived, he said he had overslept and couldn't make it. By noon, police sensed something was wrong and decided to investigate further. After checking, they discovered that Mr. Li had left Taiwan and flown to Hong Kong early that same morning without notifying the police. His hasty departure made police even more suspicious about his connection to Ms. Zhang's disappearance. Mr. Li's sudden flight made police extremely suspicious. How could it be explained that at the airport he still told police he had overslept? This was completely unreasonable and contradicted what he had said earlier. This man's quick escape made police feel they couldn't easily rule him out of the case. However, since they didn't have concrete evidence yet, they decided not to rush to conclusions, but to continue investigating. Police began investigating Ms. Zhang's assets and cash flow. In her master bedroom, they discovered a drawer that had been opened. Inside were some savings account books, but strangely, not all of them had been taken. Nevertheless, they noticed that cash amounting to 70,000 NTD, approximately US $2,270, and some foreign currency had disappeared. What was suspicious was that Ms. Zhang's credit cards remained untouched in the drawer. If this was an ordinary robbery, why would the perpetrator only take cash and not touch the credit cards? This action was completely illogical and didn't match the behavior of a typical robber. In addition, police discovered Ms. Zhang's wallet sitting neatly on the table, with her bank card and some loose change still inside. If this was truly a robbery, why would the perpetrator overlook these valuable items? The fact that the wallet was left untouched made the case even stranger, because typically in robberies, criminals won't pass up easily accessible assets. All of these abnormalities pointed in only one direction. This was not an ordinary robbery, but very likely a homicide staged to cover up the evidence. Police continued to expand the scope of their investigation and decided to check security cameras in the surrounding area. Through this, they discovered that around 11 p.m. on June 14th, a white car appeared near Ms. Zhang's apartment. After closer examination, police confirmed this car belonged to Li Zhongwei. When they continued monitoring, they found the car had been parked near the apartment for quite a long time before leaving around 2 a.m. This further increased suspicion about his connection to Ms. Zhang's disappearance. The fact that his car appeared at the scene for an extended period without a clear reason made police even more convinced that Li played an important role in this case. Police decided to obtain a warrant to search Li Zhongwei's car. When his sister drove the car over, police conducted a careful search in the presence of a prosecutor, and the entire process was recorded on video. The results were shocking. Inside the car, especially in the trunk area and back seat, police discovered numerous blood stains, although they had been carefully wiped clean. To verify, they used luminol, and the hidden blood stains appeared clearly under the light. Blood samples were collected and DNA tested, and the results showed that these blood stains matched Ms. Zhang's blood. Not only that, police also found some hair strands and fabric remnants in the car. After conducting forensic analysis, they discovered that these hair strands belonged to Ms. Zhang, and the fabric piece found in the car matched the missing shower curtain from her apartment. All of this evidence further confirmed police suspicions. Li Zhongwei was the perpetrator. Every trace, from blood to hair to fabric, pointed directly at him, making the case clearer than ever. With sufficient evidence in hand, police issued an international warrant for Li Zhongwei. After a period on the run, he was finally arrested in Hong Kong and extradited back to Taiwan to face justice. During interrogation, despite clear evidence, stubbornly denied guilt and refused to admit that he had killed Ms. Zhang. According to police investigation, Li and Ms. Zhang knew each other through a mutual friend. Initially, they were simply friends, but gradually Li began to develop romantic feelings for Ms. Zhang. However, Ms. Zhang already had a boyfriend and had no intention of pursuing a romantic relationship with him. This made Li feel angry, leading to deep disappointment. These negative emotions seemed to have driven him to extreme actions, ultimately creating a heartbreaking tragedy. Furthermore, Li knew that Ms. Zhang was financially stable while he was experiencing money troubles. He had borrowed money from her multiple times, but never paid it back. Ms. Zhang had reminded him about this debt, but Li had no intention of repaying it. Police believe that Li's motive may have stemmed from anger over his rejected feelings, combined with increasing financial pressure, which led him to develop the intent to kill Ms. Zhang. Based on the evidence collected, police reconstructed the entire sequence of events. On the night of June 14, 2000, after Ms. Zhang's boyfriend left in the morning, we came to her apartment around 11 p.m. Because he was an acquaintance, Ms. Zhang opened the door and invited him in. During their conversation, the two may have argued about money or romantic matters, which caused the atmosphere to become tense. In a fit of rage, we killed Ms. Zhang right there in the bathroom. After committing the crime, we carefully cleaned up the scene, wiped away the blood stains, and rearranged the items in the apartment to create a tidy appearance. He even used the electric fan to dry the floor after cleaning, seemingly to conceal any traces that might arouse police suspicion. After completing the cleanup, we used the shower curtain to wrap Ms. Zhang's body, then carried it down to his car and drove it to another location to dispose of the body, attempting to erase all traces. Before leaving, to make it look like a robbery, we took some cash from the house both to disguise his true purpose and to obtain spending money. However, despite being very careful in cleaning up the scene, we couldn't completely erase all the blood traces. The hidden blood stains, along with evidence in the car such as blood, hair, and fabric, became the evidence that incriminated him. The biggest problem in this case was that Ms. Zhang's body had still not been found. Police conducted extensive searches from coastal areas to the mountains surrounding Taipei, places where Li might have gone that night based on the car's travel history. However, despite relentless search efforts, the results remained fruitless. Ms. Zhang's body became a strange question mark in the case, making all the surrounding information even more obscure and difficult to understand. During the investigation, some strange events occurred that sent chills down the investigators' spines. One of the investigators, Kai Chun-hui, recounted his experience. After completing the crime scene examination at Ms. Zhang's apartment, the investigation team decided to organize a small memorial ceremony there, hoping that Ms. Zhang's spirit might still be present and could help them uncover the truth. When preparing to film the memorial ceremony, a strange incident occurred. Kai Chun-hui's video camera suddenly stopped working despite his attempts to fix it. He thought the battery might be dead, so he replaced it with a new one, but the situation didn't improve. His colleague even ran out to buy new batteries, but the camera still completely refused to work. What was strange was that when he handed the camera to his colleague and asked him to film outside the apartment, it worked normally. He took the camera back and tried again, but there was still no response. Both cameras they had brought to the scene encountered the same malfunction and couldn't operate at this location. Clearly before coming, they had checked everything thoroughly and everything was working fine. So why couldn't the cameras function in Ms. Zhang's apartment? Unable to explain it, they decided to borrow another camera from the precinct to try. However, the result remained the same. As soon as the camera was placed inside the apartment, it wouldn't work, but when taken outside, it functioned normally. This was a phenomenon they had never encountered in any investigation, and the police officers, prosecutors, and judges all witnessed the strangeness. Everyone felt confused and didn't dare say anything more. No one could explain this inexplicable phenomenon. Afterward, Kai Chun-hui whispered to his colleagues, "If you can, please come find me, and we will help you find justice so you can rest in peace." Strangely, that night, he had a very unusual dream. He recounted, "There was a woman about 5 feet 1 inch tall who grabbed my hand and pulled me forward. I didn't turn around, just kept following her. Although I couldn't see her face, I could sense the deep sadness in her eyes. We walked toward the sea, through a rice field, then continued on a village road. After walking for a while, an old man stopped me and said, 'Don't go any further.' And then I woke up." Recalling the dream, Kai Chun-hui felt that the image of the woman in his dream closely resembled Ms. Zhang, both petite, with shoulder-length hair. He immediately told his team leader about the dream. After hearing it, the team leader said, "I believe you." He immediately called the prosecutor and seriously reported the matter. Last night, Zhang Jinghua appeared in his dream. She's buried in a place with mountains, the sea, and a road in between. This strange dream seemed like an inexplicable sign, yet it coincided with information that police hadn't yet found. Kai Chun-hui's feeling about the woman in his dream made the case even more mysterious and unbelievable. To recreate the situation at that time, Kai Chun-hui and his colleague drove to Jinshan. The coastal scenery seemed to bear some resemblance to the location he had dreamed about, but it wasn't exactly the same as in his dream. They continued driving, searching further, hoping to find new clues. After traveling a distance, they suddenly spotted a roadside earth god shrine. They decided to stop and perform a prayer ceremony, hoping to receive help. Upon seeing the shrine, Kai Chun-hui said, "The moment I saw it, I immediately knew that was the old man from my dream who had stopped me. At that moment, I truly got chills." This powerful feeling made him unable to deny the strangeness and coincidence of his dream. This shrine had been rebuilt, but previously, according to local residents, it had once had 3 statues. Currently, only a single statue remained, creating a mysterious scene and making him feel even more that this was the place where Ms. Zhang might have been buried. Police then sought out a feng shui master to examine the area, hoping to receive guidance about Ms. Zhang's burial location. However, they also didn't overlook scientific methods to shorten the search time. They contacted a ground-penetrating radar expert, but due to the complex terrain with many rock formations and high humidity, the use of ground-penetrating radar couldn't achieve the expected effectiveness. Therefore, they decided not to continue using this method. Here's the translation in standard American English. Police also considered using search dogs, but at that time there were no cadaver dogs in the country, forcing them to contact a famous dog training facility in Japan. However, this facility declined, stating that the scene didn't have any specific points where search dogs could be used, and if the body was buried deep underground, the search would be very difficult. In that situation, police had no choice but to dig spot by spot, hoping to find Ms. Zhang's body. Unfortunately, Despite digging across the hillside for many days, they still didn't find any information about the body's location. Their relentless efforts had reached a dead end, making the case even more obscure and difficult to resolve. Finally, based on the abnormal blood distribution in the bathroom, the pattern of blood droplets in the car, as well as Ms. Zhang's activity records for over 2 years afterward, the court issued a comprehensive verdict. This evidence showed that Ms. Zhang had completely disappeared, leaving no trace of life. She had no records of any social activity, no spending records, no travel records, no ATM withdrawal records, no contact with anyone, no appearance in any photographs, and no immigration records for an extended period. These absences further confirmed that Ms. Zhang had completely disappeared without leaving any trace. The court recognized that her disappearance was not a temporary event, but a tragic conclusion. Therefore, the court ultimately ruled that Ms. Zhang was dead, although her body had still not been found. This decision officially closed part of the case, though questions about the reasons and details surrounding her death remained unanswered. The police officers, prosecutors, and even the judges involved in this case all experienced inexplicable and strange phenomena. One of the first incidents involved the car parked in the parking lot. Specifically, the trunk opened automatically without anyone touching it, leaving investigators confused and questioning this strangeness. The prosecutor in charge of the case also continuously received strange phone calls at midnight. When he answered, the phone only emitted the sobbing of a girl, but no one spoke. These events added to the mystery of the case. Another inexplicable phenomenon involved Zayuebe 1, the district police officer in charge of the case, who also had a special experience. That evening, after sealing off the crime scene, he looked inside the house and then went home. In his dream, he found himself on a ship in the open sea. A soaking wet girl crawled toward him, grabbed his hand, and begged for help. He asked her what was wrong, and the scene shifted to the living room of a house. The girl said she was in great pain and asked for his help. In the dream, he saw a lot of blood on the walls, and then he woke up. The next day, he shared with his colleagues that he had a very frightening dream, and he had never dreamed of anything so strange before. When he went to the office to get something, he was suddenly shocked to see the photo of the missing woman. He immediately recognized that the girl in his dream was the person in the photo. "This is the woman who grabbed my hand in the dream. Why is she in this photo?" He was extremely shocked. Upon asking, he learned that the missing woman was Ms. Zhang, whose home crime scene he had visited the evening before. Could this be a coincidence? At the trial, the judge asked Kai Chunhui, "Is Ms. Zhang still alive?" He replied, "I don't know." The judge continued asking, "Was there a murder?" He still firmly answered, "I don't know." However, Kai Chunhui knew that the judge was seeking a definite answer from him, a decisive answer about the case's outcome. Nevertheless, as a scientific investigator, he could only state what he had clear evidence for and couldn't draw conclusions without sufficient basis. The final piece of this case puzzle couldn't come from scientific evidence, but had to rely on the judge's conscience to complete. The court had to accept that although Ms. Zhang's body wasn't found and suspect Li didn't confess, circumstantial evidence could still create a clear conclusion. Li was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. At the first trial, however, he persistently denied guilt. "I didn't kill her." At the appeal trial, he became even more arrogant and accused the police of framing him. He said that when police searched the car, they required him to turn away. After they had rummaged through everything, only then did they call him back. He continued to argue. So did the police violate procedures or not? How could they bring a bunch of blood there? Although Li's accusations didn't convince the court, they were evidence of his doubt and arrogance as he tried to deny all the truth. Furthermore, the car where important blood traces were found was actually brought to police for inspection by Li's own sister. Not only was there consent from his relative, but the entire search process was fully recorded on video, with the prosecutor witnessing and closely supervising according to proper procedures. Therefore, Li's accusation that police framed him had absolutely no basis. However, at trial, Li showed no remorse whatsoever. On the contrary, he even shouted loudly, displayed an arrogant attitude and lack of cooperation, which outraged public opinion. The initial sentence was life imprisonment, but it was once converted to the death penalty due to his contemptuous attitude toward the law and the brutal nature of the case. However, at the final appeal stage, the Supreme Court decided to maintain the life sentence, reasoning that Li voluntarily returned to Taiwan to cooperate with the investigation, rather than fleeing to the end. In addition, The court ordered Lee to compensate the victim's family more than 2.57 million new Taiwan dollars, approximately 83,500 US dollars, including 1.3 million to the victim's mother and 1.2 million to the victim's father. However, everyone understands that, although Lee Young-wai had to pay the price before the law, no matter how large the compensation, it could never make up for the pain the family must carry for the rest of their lives. A life lost, a family shattered, that's a price that can never be fully paid. Justice isn't only found in the verdict given to the perpetrator, but also in returning the truth, returning the voice, and returning the final piece to the victim. Until her body is found, this story hasn't truly closed. And perhaps, only when that secret is revealed will the darkness leave this case that has haunted so many people for so many years. Story 3. On social media, she was a symbol of wealth, beauty, and the life everyone dreams of. Travel, parties, luxury brands, perfect smiles before the camera. But in just 48 fateful hours, everything collapsed so quickly that no one could understand what had happened. In the bustling heart of Phuket, amid the ecstatic crowds at the festival, a woman fell into a trap so sweet it was deadly. Her smile remained online, her account stayed lit up, but their owner never had the chance to return. What really happened in those brief 48 hours? Who was the person beside her in those final moments? In early July 2024, Phuket entered peak tourist season. Brilliant tropical sunlight stretched across fine sandy shores. Water droplets from the water-splashing festival flew through the air, merging with the music and lively laughter of tourists. Southeast Asia's vacation paradise remained as vibrant and captivating as ever, welcoming waves of people coming to enjoy their dream holiday. Among those tourists was Yen Ruomin, 38, from China, owner of an upscale yoga and fitness center in Qingdao. Not only successful in her career, Ruomin was also a symbol of luxury on social media, famous for her beauty, lavish lifestyle, and upper-class taste for enjoyment. Her life overflowed with images that made others envious. Checking in at Michelin restaurants, meditating and practicing yoga beside private pools, wearing limited-edition designer items, appearing at exclusive parties, she had flaunted her VIP casino card in Macau, and was often spotted enjoying the bright lights of the nightlife world. She was extremely strict about managing her appearance. Not only did she regularly receive Botox injections to maintain smooth skin, she consistently shared personal experiences about aesthetic medicine, bodybuilding, and anti-aging treatments on social media. At nearly 40, she maintained the face and figure of a woman in her 20s, earning her the online title of Ageless Goddess. This meticulously crafted image, combined with the financial resources she built through running her own business, created a perfect persona, beautiful, successful, and both admired and envied by others. In late June 2024, Ruomin began a new journey. She told friends this time she would go to Thailand, both to participate in the famous water festival and to take the opportunity to rest and recharge after busy months. On June 30th, she posted a selfie on social media with the caption, "Thailand's water festival really helps relieve stress." The feeling is completely different from China. Everyone can freely enjoy this fun. In the frame, Ruomin wore a brightly colored resort outfit, beaming with a radiant smile, with a crowded street immersed in the festival behind her. Everything exuded freedom, excitement, and overflowing travel enthusiasm. No one suspected this would be her last post. From that day forward, Ruomin's personal page fell completely silent. Initially, Ruomin's friends weren't particularly concerned. They were used to her occasionally disappearing for a few days to attend meditation retreats, find inner peace, or disconnect from social media. Temporary loss of contact with Ruomin was nothing unusual. However, on July 3rd, an abnormality began to make everyone feel uneasy. A close friend, very familiar with Ruomin's daily habits, suddenly discovered that her WeChat step count had been continuously at 0 for several days, while her account status always showed online. This strange contradiction immediately sent chills down her spine, because no matter how reclusive Ruomin could be, she had never been literally motionless like this. Urgent calls began to be made, but no one answered Ruomin's phone. Messages sent were met with silence. The feeling of unease from one person quickly spread to many others. When contacting Ruomin's older sister and friends back home, everyone agreed. This time, something was not right. And then the most horrifying thing arrived. On the very night Ruomin lost contact, her family suddenly received a strange call from Thailand. On the other end of the line, a cold, emotionless voice uttered each word as sharp as a knife blade. Prepare 1 million yuan ransom. If you report to police or contact the embassy, we cannot guarantee the hostage's safety. The tone was brief, sharp, and absolutely left no room for argument. It didn't sound like a scam, but exactly like a deliberate kidnapping, prepared in advance, and aimed directly at the target. Ruman's family immediately fell into chaos. They tried to verify the information while seeking support from every possible source: friends, acquaintances, international contacts, and authorities. But all hope faded within just a few short hours. Shortly after that call, Ruman's phone officially went dead. All her social media platforms stopped operating, and there was no signal, no status, no other trace left. On the evening of July 3rd, after all attempts at contact failed, Ruman's family was forced to make a final decision: report to the police. That very night, they submitted an urgent investigation request to Thai police, hoping every minute could salvage the situation. Police immediately pulled surveillance camera footage from areas where Ruman had appeared. And then, each frame that passed across the screen left everyone stunned, silent. Footage recorded on the afternoon of July 1st showed Ruman appeared on a Bangkok street and was met by an unfamiliar man. Not only that, the two were hand in hand, walking together into a hotel. And from that point on, there was no more news. A beautiful businesswoman, radiant before the camera, had in an instant become a mysteriously missing person. And the man holding her hand, the one who appeared and then disappeared at the same time, suddenly became the most important puzzle piece in the entire case. Where had Ruman gone? Who was that man? And what really happened behind the hotel door that day? Right after Thai police received the report, confirmed Ruman's missing status, and traced the camera footage showing she had been picked up by an unfamiliar man, they immediately opened an investigation. However, just the next day another clue, seemingly unrelated, suddenly appeared. This clue came from a remote village in the Bangkok suburbs, where life was typically peaceful, slow, and almost isolated from urban chaos. But in recent days, villagers continuously complained about a thick, foul stench rising from the forest area and pond on the village outskirts. At first, most people assumed someone must have secretly dumped kitchen waste or animal carcasses in that area, as this sometimes happened in remote regions. However, under the intense heat lasting many days, the stench not only didn't diminish, but grew increasingly terrible, to the point that just passing by was enough to make people nauseous. Finally, unable to endure it any longer, they decided to report to police. Police quickly arrived at the scene after receiving the report. As soon as they opened the car door and stepped out, a thick, foul stench immediately hit them, heavy and unpleasant enough to make everyone instinctively furrow their brows. A veteran officer in the team, someone with many years of experience handling criminal cases, slightly furrowed his brow, then following the strange smell, headed straight toward the forest area outside the village. They crossed a small path covered with dry leaves, rustling sound of footsteps echoing through the dim, damp space. When they approached the pond behind a thick bush, the entire group immediately noticed a blue waterproof tarp. It lay conspicuously amid nature, too clean, too neat to have been blown there by wind or water. Police only needed a glance to understand. Someone had deliberately covered something underneath. Carefully, they used gloves to gently lift a corner of the tarp. In that moment, the air seemed to freeze. Under the tarp layer was a charred black plastic bag, and right at the torn section, a horrifying scene was revealed. A severely decomposed human thigh turned black. The scene was immediately sealed off, and the forensic team urgently arrived. Due to the severe decomposition of the body, police couldn't identify it at the scene. However, based on the time, location, and recent missing person reports, they quickly connected it to the case of Chinese tourist Ru Min, who had mysteriously disappeared during her Thailand trip. The human thigh found was likely the first key piece to solving this dark case. But everything didn't stop there. Just a few kilometers from the initial discovery location, in another bush, police continued to find new clues. On the ground were clear burn marks, some patches of earth even carbonized by intense heat, showing that a high-temperature incineration had occurred here. The forensic team immediately conducted an examination and collected evidence in this area. There they found remnants of unburned fabric, luggage debris, a pink rolling suitcase burned to fragments along with hair, body tissue, and human bone fragments mixed in the blackened earth. Preliminary test results confirmed all were human tissue and remains. The evidence collected initially was more than sufficient to prove that human body incineration had occurred at the scene. The perpetrator clearly attempted to use outdoor fire to erase all traces, but the lack of specialized equipment, insufficient accelerants, plus the complex structure of the human body, caused the disposal process to fail. The perpetrator thought fire could bury the truth, but ultimately inadvertently left behind a field of living evidence. Police immediately expanded the search radius around the area. In the dark-colored soil still reeking of burning, a series of personal items not yet fully destroyed were found one after another. These included fragments of women's clothing, remaining accessories, and especially a pair of silicone breast implants not destroyed by the flames. After collecting sufficient samples at the scene, combined with DNA identification results and various other professional analyses, police reached a final conclusion. The body parts found were indeed the remains of Rui Min, the tourist who had disappeared earlier. By the time the victim's identity was confirmed, police gradually realized that behind this seemingly mysterious disappearance was not an accident or impulsive act, but rather a carefully prepared violent crime. Clues gradually revealed a blood-soaked, calculated story. On July 12th, Thai police officially issued an announcement. In the Bang Pa area of Ayutthaya province, beside a pond near the village, they had discovered the remaining leg, and after comparison, confirmed it belonged to Rui Min. The time of death was determined to be the early morning of July 3rd. With the body verified, the missing person case was immediately upgraded to a serious transnational murder case. From here, the investigation entered a completely new phase. Thai police coordinated with China, beginning to reconstruct Rui Min's entire journey before she disappeared, reviewing every hour, every destination, every connection. Not a single detail was allowed to be overlooked. This included reviewing Rui Min's previous social media interaction records. Very quickly, police narrowed down a suspicious target in Rui Min's social media interaction history. A male account appeared with abnormally frequent activity. After tracing the identity, they discovered the account owner was Ma Yongqing, 33, from Anhui Province, China. He immediately became the prime suspect. From public data on social media platforms, police realized Yongqing was not a stranger who appeared by chance. On the contrary, he had quietly approached Rui Min about 2 months earlier, showing clear initiative and direction. As early as May, under one of Rui Min's travel posts, Yongqing left a suggestive comment, half joking, half serious. "You're so beautiful and lucky, lend me some of your luck too." The tone was casual, polite, not too ostentatious. Enough to create goodwill, but also enough to create an opportunity for conversation. From just one seemingly harmless comment like that, the door to communication between the two had been opened. After that interaction, Rui Min and Yongqing quickly followed each other, then began messaging privately more frequently. Police immediately conducted a comprehensive background investigation on this man. The results showed that on social media, Yongqing built a perfect image for himself. His friend circle overflowed with photos steeped in upper-class style, showing off Rolex watches, driving a BMW along the beach, checking in at famous islands, wearing tailored suits, his face always accompanied by a polite, confident smile. Each photo had beautiful composition, as if staged and carefully calculated, creating the impression of a young, successful man standing at the peak of glory. Not stopping there, he also posted photos drinking wine on private jets, frequently flying between Malaysia, Thailand, and Dubai, describing himself as busy with project negotiations and international cooperation. Every photo, every status, all aimed toward the image of a young international investor, rich, talented, and full of promise. On the surface, Yongqing resembled the ideal dream man, surrounded by luxury hotels, high-end nightclubs, supercars, and Michelin dining experiences. Not a few people, just scrolling through his personal page, would immediately form an impression. This is a classy, talented, and wealthy man. In some posts, he even subtly revealed he was participating in long-term investment projects in Thailand. However, after just a short investigation period, police exposed the truth behind that glittering facade. Everything Yongqing displayed, from supercars and private jets to his international businessman image, was just an elaborate, sophisticated fraud. The company under his name had long been drowning in debt, existing on paper, but in reality, empty, not truly operating, just a shell for him to use to deceive others. Financial records and background showed Yongqing's true self was completely opposite to the image he tried to create on social media. Previously, he had impersonated equipment rental services to defraud investors. In fact, his criminal record included a case where he defrauded a woman of 2 million yuan, approximately $280,000, then only returned 200,000 yuan, about $28,000, before disappearing without a trace. His life was never successful and leisurely like those glossy photos, but drowned in gambling, debt, and successive fraud schemes. To put it bluntly, Yongking was never the accomplished gentleman he claimed to be. He wasn't a businessman, wasn't wealthy, wasn't even someone with a future. He was just a fraud living on lies, a fallen gambler, a predator in glamorous clothing, patiently waiting for an opportunity to strike. And it was precisely that luxurious mask, a mask created from a series of false images and purposeful words, that caused Rui Min to let down her guard. Police assessed that between Rui Min and Yongking, there had been an active and lively online conversation process, creating sufficient intimacy to lead to an in-person meeting. And at the face-to-face meeting during the water festival, Yongking's approach motivation likely stemmed from his prolonged desperate financial situation, while Rui Min stood out with her image as single, beautiful, traveling alone. All these factors had inadvertently made her the ideal prey in the predator's eyes. From the data obtained, police traced airport records, immigration information, and street surveillance camera systems, thereby confirming the first meeting between the two occurred on June 26, 2024, at a shopping center in central Bangkok. According to footage extracted from cameras in Times Square's underground parking lot, around 5:22 p.m., Yongking drove to the scene in a rented white Honda. Just minutes later, Rui Min appeared in the frame pulling a travel suitcase. After meeting, both acted extremely naturally, intimate as if they had known each other for a long time. Yongking proactively helped Rui Min with her luggage, then walked confidently beside her, together proceeding toward the car parked in the basement. Afterward, they drove to a restaurant in central Bangkok for dinner. In the restaurant surveillance video, the image of the two appeared with comfortable smiles, talking non-stop, eyes exchanging intimately. At a glance, no different from a couple in their sweet phase. However, when police reviewed all the footage with an investigator's eye, one important detail immediately caught their attention. Although Yongking showed enthusiasm and outward calmness, his hands and eyes repeatedly unconsciously revealed tension. He frequently glanced around, checking the surrounding environment as if afraid of being followed, and continuously operated his phone with abnormal frequency, not like the relaxed state of someone enjoying a date. By the afternoon of July 1st, supermarket cameras recorded the moment both entered a convenience store, one after the other. Yongking carried shopping bags while Rui Min walked behind with her head down, looking at her phone and smiling, appearing extremely relaxed, not vigilant, not worried, completely unaware of the terrible thing waiting ahead. But all that peace stopped at the next video. In a frame extracted that same evening, security cameras recorded the two entering a villa-style hotel in Bangkok's suburbs. Everything seemed still peaceful. They entered the room, the door closed. But from that moment, not a single camera captured Rui Min stepping out again. The relationship between Rui Min and Yongking remained a big question. Thai police stated that cameras recorded them holding hands entering the hotel and spending the night there, showing a certain level of intimacy. However, chat conversations disclosed by Rui Min's close friend revealed a completely different slice. Just 2 days before the incident, Rui Min was still coyly chatting with another man, complaining, "You basically don't love me, I'm so sad." And that man responded indifferently, "We've only known each other for 2 days. What's this talk about love or not love?" Here we won't judge Rui Min's friendship style or love life. However, according to friends sharing, behind her strong, confident online appearance, Rui Min in real life was just a simple girl, bearing marriage pressure and yearning to find genuine care and affection. Perhaps because of this, she easily opened her heart to men who appeared at the right moment, even if newly acquainted. This Thailand trip, ultimately, was it to meet an online relationship, or just a chance meeting that led to tragedy? Only Rui Min would know the answer. Sadly, she no longer has the chance to speak that truth even once more. She had no idea that the romantic international date she anticipated was actually a death trap prepared long ago. Police continued to trace the movement trajectory of the white Honda that Yongking rented. Before long, they discovered that during Rui Min's disappearance, this car had left Bangkok and driven straight to the suburbs of Ayutthaya province, precisely where the body was later discovered. Each landmark in that journey coincided with when Rui Min disappeared, further strengthening the assessment that yanking was directly related to the crime. Combining surveillance camera data and timeline, police speculated the murder occurred in the early morning of July 2nd, right at the hotel where they were staying. When authorities arrived at the villa-style hotel in Bangkok, they were surprised to find the room had been cleaned to an abnormally spotless degree. Everything neat and tidy, not a blood stain, not a sign of struggle, even the bedsheets flat and smooth without messy folds. Everything resembled a room where nothing had ever happened, but that silence was only surface level. When the forensic team entered the bathroom, they discovered extremely small blood traces remaining at the drain opening. Difficult to detect with the naked eye, but rapid on-site testing confirmed the plumbing system still retained Ru Min's DNA. This proved the murder almost certainly occurred within the enclosed bathroom space. Experts assessed that the small bathroom was easy to seal and also a convenient place to wash away traces with water. Most likely the perpetrator used sulfuric acid to clean blood, attempting to erase all evidence in a short time. However, he greatly underestimated the police's forensic capabilities. Next came details chilling enough to make anyone hearing them shudder. Based on surveillance camera data, hotel entry-exit records, and the white Honda's movement trajectory, police judged that Yanking had purposefully dismembered the body right in the hotel. After committing the crime, he deliberately wrapped the body, then stuffed everything into the pink suitcase brought on the trip. Around 3:45 a.m., Yanking left the hotel, driving the car toward Ayutthaya province's suburbs. At a deserted plot of land with little foot traffic, he stopped. Just minutes later, in the silent night, the sound of catching fire rang out, accompanied by popping sounds of burning objects. A thick, foul stench quickly dispersed in the air, that heavy, haunting smell impossible to mistake. Yanking thought he had chosen the perfect place to incinerate the body, but he missed a fatal detail. Around 4 to 5 a.m., local people in this area had already started going out to work. A local resident riding a motorcycle on a rural road, about 660 feet, 200 meters from the scene, happened to become an important witness. When passing that deserted road section in the night, from afar, he saw fierce flames rising, accompanied by billowing black smoke columns rising from the forest. Feeling strange, he immediately slowed down, stopped the vehicle to observe for a moment. In the flickering firelight dancing amid the darkness, he also vaguely saw a shadowy figure moving near the fire. However, at that moment, he didn't suspect anything. In rural areas, people often burn trash or dispose of crop residue at night, so he only viewed it as normal and quickly left. It wasn't until several days later, when police issued a reward notice and announced that a burned body had been discovered in this area, that the resident suddenly recalled the scene from that dark night. He immediately proactively reported, provided testimony, and assisted police in the investigation. At the same time, police traced the GPS data from the rental car Yankin used, and the results matched the witness testimony perfectly. The positioning system showed that early morning on the day of the incident, Yankin had stopped the car multiple times in a short period, and particularly his travel route was fixed in the scene area from 3:45 a.m. to 5:10 a.m. When evidence from the cremation scene, the car's movement trajectory and witness testimony were pieced together. Yankin's entire crime sequence formed a closed chain of evidence. There was no more doubt, he was the one who directly murdered Rumin and disposed of the body. An arrest warrant was immediately issued by police, but when authorities began taking action, Yankin had completely disappeared. Phone turned off, rental car returned, and all traces of him suddenly stopped in just one night. So where had Yankin fled? While that question remained unanswered, Thai police immediately issued a nationwide manhunt order. While implementing tight controls at all border crossings, the suspect's data was synchronized into the border system, airports, ports, and land checkpoints, all tightened security, like an invisible net waiting for the day to catch the fugitive. However, at that time, no one could determine whether he was still in Thailand. But right when investigators were busily arranging the final puzzle pieces of the case and tracking the suspect's escape route, an abnormal signal suddenly came from Macau, China, hundreds of miles from the scene. The system recorded that Rumin's WeChat payment account suddenly had a consumer transaction at a supermarket in Macau. What made people shudder was that the timing of this transaction appeared just hours after the victim was confirmed dead. That sudden clue immediately made the entire investigation team tense as a bowstring. The atmosphere in the special case meeting room became heavy instantly. A woman confirmed as the victim an account that should have died with its owner. Why was it still being used to spend money? It turned out that just 2 days after Rumen lost contact, Yenkin began quietly executing his retreat plan. He checked out of the villa-style hotel in Bangkok, then returned to rented white Honda, erasing an important link in the journey. On July 2nd, Yenkin appeared at Bangkok International Airport and left Thailand. But he didn't fly directly to Macau, where transaction traces later appeared, but deliberately took a roundabout route through Hong Kong, then transferred from Hong Kong into Macau. This was clearly a misdirection tactic, aimed at breaking police tracking chains by creating time gaps and ambiguity about flight routes, making it difficult to determine his exact whereabouts during the escape period. However, Yenkin didn't expect that Rumen's phone, which he carried to construct the she's still alive facade, would become the fatal clue. Early morning on July 4th, Rumen's WeChat account suddenly came alive in Macau. Payment data showed a transaction at a Carrefour supermarket. Right after, morning of July 5th, WeChat continued to record a transaction at the Venetian Macau Hotel, purchasing buns and durian. Afternoon of July 6th at 5:04 p.m., the account again showed spending of 1,043 yuan, about $145. That evening at 6:40 p.m., WeChat appeared again at Carrefour, making another shopping trip. All these consumption cycles occurred after Rumen disappeared and was suspected to have died. Clearly, she couldn't have made those transactions herself. Police quickly confirmed that it was Yenkin who carried Rumen's phone and deliberately used her WeChat account to create the illusion. The victim is still alive. He likely wanted to use this transaction chain to confuse investigators' judgment, planting a false scenario. Rumen was still moving around, still living normally. The ultimate purpose was only one: by time to escape, but Yenkin greatly underestimated the era he was living in. He could escape a hotel, erase traces in a sealed room, or burn a body in the night, but couldn't escape the dense surveillance data network covering the entire globe. And then the most ironic paradox of the case appeared. Before Thai police even issued an international arrest warrant, Yenkin had already turned himself in Macau. It all began with just a small, seemingly harmless detail: a fake watch, which inadvertently became the final straw ending his fugitive journey. It turned out that on July 10th, Yenkin entered a pawn shop in Macau, planning to pawn a designer watch to exchange for $50,000 Macau dollars in cash to continue his escape. However, during the appraisal process, the pawn shop employee discovered the watch was just a high-grade replica. Recognizing the abnormal situation, the shop immediately reported to police. When Macau authorities arrived, Yenkin's escape route officially closed. He was stopped right there, with no chance to maneuver or take another step. Ironically, at the time of arrest, Yenkin had less than 1,500 Hong Kong dollars, about $200 on him, but carried the most damning evidence: Rumen's phone and some of her personal belongings. These exhibits not only exposed his flight behavior, but also directly linked him to the murder and body disposal. Yenkin was immediately arrested by Macau police, and the case was then transferred to law enforcement agencies in China and Thailand. When Yenkin was arrested, this shocking transnational murder case finally entered the trial phase. Thailand had expressed the desire to bring the suspect back to their country for trial, but considering that Yenkin was a Chinese citizen and the victim was also Chinese, both sides later reached an agreement. Extradite Yenkin back to China to face punishment under local law. In court, Yenkin appeared in prison clothes, looking haggard and weak, completely opposite to the glamorous businessman image he once displayed on social media. He understood very well. This moment standing before the court was the moment determining his fate. Before the court, the evidence file had been completed rigorously. From police investigation reports, forensic identification results, to important surveillance video clips and evidence collected at the scene, everything had formed a logical, closed chain of evidence. Especially the blood traces collected in the car, remains reacting during forensic testing, along with the consumption history he left when using Rumen's WeChat, had become fatal, irrefutable evidence. Yenkin's defense lawyer attempted to redirect the argument, claiming this was only unintentional behavior during an argument, leading to temporary loss of control. But this argument was quickly rejected decisively by the prosecution. The procurator had pointed out that from proactively approaching the victim early on, establishing a wealthy facade, step-by-step winning trust and building confidence to committing murder, robbing property, dismembering and incinerating the body, then continuing to use the victim's WeChat account for spending and transferring money. This entire chain of behavior showed clear preparation, purpose, and calculation. This was not an impulsive outburst, nor a moment of loss of self-control. On the contrary, it was a crime plan executed step by step, leading Jenkins straight into the trajectory of murder with cold calculation. After many hours of intense debate in court, the trial panel reached a final verdict. Jenkin was guilty of intentional homicide and destruction of remains to conceal the crime, therefore sentenced to death. That verdict, though unable to save a lost life, at least brought some belated justice to the victim's family. Both Rumin and Jenkin created perfect images for themselves on the internet. The sophisticated, independent wealthy woman and the polite, successful, classy man. Two lives like two roles, seemingly destined for romantic connection, but in reality, just two masks colliding. When each person only saw the best version of the other, they easily misjudged true nature, thereby stepping into danger zones they didn't even recognize. Rumian was the typical image of people strong on the surface, but fragile within. She built a glamorous world, but behind that halo was loneliness, emotional pressure, and the need to be loved and cared for. This emotional vulnerability made her easily trust and abandon all vigilance for someone appearing perfect. Conversely, Jenkin was the typical predatory criminal type. He understood the victim's weakness was craving affection, and he exploited precisely that point. Behind his polite appearance, he was a fraudster gambling addict, ready to take lives to solve his own financial deadlock. The case is a painful warning about misplaced trust in the era of online dating and virtual life. Social media is where everyone can become the most glamorous version of themselves, but that glamour may not be real. And the more perfect something is, the more easily people mistake it for safety. Story 4. A doctor on duty at a hospital in Germany received an urgent call from abroad. The message was brief, just a few words, but it was enough to make her drop the phone right there in the operating room. Her daughter, once the greatest source of pride in her life, was now in critical condition from a drug overdose at a hospital all the way in Moldova. That young woman was none other than Anna Lejkovic, the 21-year-old daughter of Paraskovija Lejkovic. Anna, a medical student living alone in Moldova, had a long history of reckless behavior. Since childhood, she had been known for her free-spirited nature, often drinking, and more than once involved with drugs, including multiple incidents of overdose. Upon learning of her daughter's condition, Paraskovia didn't hesitate for even a moment. She completed her surgery, left the hospital, and caught the next flight to Moldova. The moment she arrived, she rushed to Anna's home, heart pounding with fear and guilt. Consumed by all the terrifying possibilities of what could have happened to the daughter she loved so deeply. To understand why Paraskovia reacted with such panic, we need to go back to her past. Born and raised in Moldova, a small country nestled between Romania and Ukraine in Eastern Europe, Paraskovia was an exceptional student from a young age. She entered medical school at just 18. During her studies, she met Basil, a young and gifted entrepreneur who had already made a name for himself in Moldova's business community. The two quickly fell in love and married early. Just a year into the marriage, they welcomed their first child, Anna. But the happy family life didn't last. Like medical students everywhere, Paraskovia faced immense academic pressure, and juggling motherhood with the grueling demands of med school became nearly impossible. Meanwhile, Basil was constantly busy running his business. With neither parent able to take care of Anna full-time, the only solution at the time was to leave her in the care of her paternal grandparents. Unfortunately, the emotional distance between the couple grew rapidly, and eventually they divorced. Paraskovia was granted full custody. Although Basil continued to provide financial support, once he remarried, he practically disappeared from Anna's life, offering no emotional presence at all. In response to that void, Paraskovia worked harder than ever to make up for what her daughter had lost. Even after becoming a full-fledged physician, with all the time pressures that entailed, she always carved out moments to be with Anna, doing everything possible to make sure her daughter never felt unloved or neglected. Thanks to that consistent care, Anna grew up stable and confident. She became her mother's pride and joy. Despite the divorce, she seemed to navigate her teenage years without any major trauma. In fact, after graduating high school, she chose to follow in her mother's footsteps and study medicine. As she matured, Anna showed intelligence and a quick mind for learning. Occasionally she was seen partying and drinking with friends, but her mother dismissed it as typical youthful behavior, nothing to worry about. What Parascovia didn't anticipate, however, was that the real challenge wasn't just emotional support, it was financial. Covering the high cost of medical school and Anna's living expenses in Moldova became one of the greatest burdens she had to shoulder. Just as she was struggling to find a solution to her financial problems, an unexpected opportunity appeared. During a routine workday, the hospital in Germany offered Parascovia a long-term contract with a compensation package 10 times higher than what she was earning at her current hospital in Moldova. The proposal thrilled her, but it also raised serious concerns about her daughter's future. Not wanting to make a hasty decision, Parascovia sat down with Anna and laid out 2 clear options. Either move to Germany with her and restart college from the beginning, or stay in Moldova and continue her current medical program. Anna, now an adult, chose the latter. In the end, her mother prepared for the move to Germany, while Anna began looking for her own apartment to live independently. That period of living alone marked a turning point. Anna started paying much more attention to her appearance. In truth, she had always been attractive with naturally striking features. As she matured, she underwent a few minor cosmetic procedures, enhancing her looks even further. Soon, Anna began posting photos of herself on social media, using it as an outlet for self-expression and confidence. One day, almost by accident, one of her posts went viral, drawing hundreds of thousands of likes and sparking widespread attention. She enjoyed the rush of attention and began posting more frequently. Her Instagram following skyrocketed. She shared glamorous shopping photos from Paris and Milan, bikini selfies showing off her toned figure, and shots that looked straight out of a fashion magazine. When her account surpassed 10,000 followers, she became known as the stunning medical student with a trendy, modern lifestyle. But behind the glamour of Anna's Instagram life, her mother Parascovia was quietly working long, grueling hours in Germany to financially support her daughter. Worried that growing up without a father figure might leave emotional scars, Parascovia never hesitated to spend generously. Thanks to her support, Anna lived more comfortably than most of her peers. Eventually, once she was settled in Germany, Parascovia even bought Anna a luxury apartment in Moldova as a gift. Each time she scrolled through her daughter's Instagram feed, Parascovia felt reassured. The stylish clothes, smiling selfies, and apparent joy convinced her that Anna was living a full and happy life, perhaps even better than the one she herself had ever known. What she didn't know was what was really going on behind those perfectly curated photos. In reality, since her mother moved to Germany and she began living alone, Anna had full control over her life. And that freedom quickly spiraled into recklessness. She frequently hosted parties, drinking heavily with friends at home, and when alcohol no longer gave her the thrill she sought, she turned to drugs. It wasn't long before all-night parties and indiscriminate sexual encounters became part of her routine. That's what led to the hospital call. When Anna was rushed to the ER, it had been nearly 3 years since she and her mother had last lived under the same roof. Outwardly, Anna seemed to be thriving, but in truth, she had been slipping deeper into a destructive lifestyle. Still, when Parascovia received that call from the hospital, she had absolutely no idea what her daughter's life had become. As soon as she got the call, Parascovia didn't allow herself even a moment of hesitation. Before heading to Moldova, she had only one thought in mind. She had to bring Anna back to Germany and get her into rehab as soon as possible. She immediately reached out to her professional contacts in the medical field to find the best treatment center available. The only thing left was convincing her daughter to return. Fueled by that determination, Parascovia went straight to Anna's apartment and walked in. A thick cloud of marijuana hit her the moment the door opened, making it hard to breathe. The place was a mess, clothes scattered across the floor, liquor bottles everywhere, and a damp, foul-smelling atmosphere. On the couch, Anna lay passed out, looking completely drained. On the coffee table across from her sat a half-empty bottle of liquor and traces of white powder that hadn't been cleaned up. Parascovia rushed over, knelt down beside her daughter, and grabbed her by the shoulders, gently but firmly shaking her awake. Anna's reaction was deeply concerning. She barely opened her eyes despite several attempts to wake her. Clearly intoxicated, she seemed to register her mother's presence, but struggled even to stand. When she tried, she staggered and nearly collapsed. Seeing her pale face and frail body, Parascovia instantly understood how far her daughter's health had deteriorated. Holding Anna by the shoulders, she softly pleaded with her. If she kept living this way, her body wouldn't last. She explained that she had already found a top-tier rehab center, and begged Anna to come back with her. But what happened next shook Paraskovia to her core. Instead of calming down, Anna exploded with rage. She screamed that she didn't need help, shoved her mother away, and began thrashing in a state of panic. High and emotionally unstable, she cried uncontrollably, yelling that it was all her mother's fault. As her emotions spiraled, she kept shouting that Paraskovia had been absent all those years, and now, suddenly, was trying to control her life. The meltdown escalated even further. In a sudden burst of fury, Anna sprang up and ran to the kitchen. Without a second thought, she yanked open a drawer, pulled out a knife, and came charging back. Paraskovia, following closely behind, barely had time to react before her daughter lunged at her with the blade. The first stab landed, then another, and another. Dozens more followed in a frenzied, uncontrollable attack. Blood quickly spread across the floor as Paraskovia collapsed on the spot, unable to fight back. But Anna didn't stop. She climbed on top of her mother's body and began stabbing her in the abdomen. Paraskovia screamed in agony, but Anna, without a moment's hesitation, kept going. With surgical precision, Anna slashed deep into the wound, then reached inside with her bare hands. As a medical student, she knew exactly where to find the heart, and she pulled it out from her mother's chest with her own hands. She then removed the lungs and other internal organs, cutting them into small pieces with the same knife. Once the area around her was littered with torn flesh, Anna calmly gathered the parts and tossed them into the trash can, as if disposing of leftovers. Then she walked into the bathroom, rinsed the blood from her skin, and within 5 minutes was seated at her vanity, humming a soft tune and applying lipstick like nothing had happened. Shortly after, she left the apartment to meet her boyfriend. She acted completely normal. The two of them enjoyed champagne, had dinner, and chatted happily throughout their date. And as the evening came to a quiet close in the middle of a casual conversation, leaned in and calmly said, "I just killed my mother." At first, Anna's boyfriend thought she was just joking, but as soon as he saw the cold look in her eyes and realized her tone was completely serious, a chill ran down his spine. Not wanting to escalate the situation, he gently told her not to say things like that and tried to remain calm in order to defuse the tension. A few hours later, around 9:30 p.m., Anna, already drunk, had fallen asleep at his place. Seizing the opportunity, he quietly took the keys to her apartment from the pocket of her coat. One thought consumed his mind. What if she wasn't joking? He needed to see for himself. Unable to sit still any longer, he rushed to Anna's apartment, heart pounding the entire way. The moment he opened the door, he was struck by a horrific scene. Blood splattered across the kitchen floor, the body missing, and only internal organs scattered across the ground. Struggling to stay composed, he pulled out his phone and called the police. By 10 p.m., officers arrived at the scene, and even the most seasoned among them had to look away from the gruesome sight. They listened carefully as the boyfriend recounted what he had been told. But it was hard to believe that a young woman could have done something so brutal to her own mother. Still, every piece of forensic evidence pointed in one direction. This had been Anna's doing, and hers alone. There were no signs of forced entry. Her bloody footprints and fingerprints were found throughout the apartment from the body's location to the kitchen and bathroom. The knife used in the attack had only her DNA on it. At the same time, police received confirmation that Anna was still at her boyfriend's home, asleep. A unit was immediately dispatched. However, Anna seemed to realize they were closing in. Before officers could arrive, she fled. An emergency warrant was issued that night, and authorities launched a nationwide manhunt across Moldova. To track her down, investigators widened their efforts, analyzing her phone activity, social media presence, GPS data, and recent use of bank cards. From her call records, they picked up clues that she might be hiding out at a friend's house. Exactly 72 hours after the warrant was issued, was found and taken into custody. When brought into the interrogation room, Anna began screaming and protesting loudly, repeatedly demanding to know why she was being treated this way. Her reaction did not surprise the investigators. Even though they had more than enough evidence to charge her, they wanted to observe her behavior in response to her mother's death. What they saw was chilling. Despite the brutal nature of the crime, showed no signs of remorse. She insisted she had done nothing wrong. Her statements were disturbing, but so was her behavior. She avoided eye contact entirely, refused to answer basic questions, obsessively picked at her fingernails, and even laughed to herself for no clear reason. Just 3 days after the murder, Anna appeared in court for her initial hearing, held on December 16, 2020. Under Moldovan law, a first court appearance must be held within 72 hours of detention. At the preliminary hearing, prosecutors revealed a horrifying detail. The victim's internal organs had been removed while she was still alive. This emphasized the extreme cruelty of Anna's actions toward her own mother. The prosecution firmly argued that Anna fully deserved a life sentence regardless of her gender. However, under Moldovan criminal law, women cannot be sentenced to life imprisonment. This legal restriction is designed as a form of protection for vulnerable groups in society. Yet given the gruesome nature of Anna's crime, legal experts argued that such a case is nearly without precedent anywhere in the world. Throughout the hearing, Anna continued to display bizarre behavior. She lay sprawled across the defendant's bench as if she were lounging at home. At one point, she began fiddling with her nails right in the middle of the proceedings. When the judge instructed her to stand, Anna briefly sat up, only to slump back down again moments later. During the questioning that followed, when asked whether she felt remorse for what she had done, Anna simply smiled and flashed a V sign with her fingers, a mocking gesture in the middle of a murder trial. A journalist in the courtroom, unable to contain their outrage, shouted at her, calling her a mother killer. Anna responded with a sarcastic wave, as if she were saying goodbye, then turned away. In light of her disturbing behavior, even her own defense attorney appeared visibly unsettled. He immediately requested a mental health evaluation. He argued that his client was not mentally competent at the time of the murder, citing prolonged substance abuse involving both alcohol and drugs. Rather than imprisonment, the attorney urged the court to send Anna for psychiatric assessment and treatment. The court agreed and temporarily suspended the trial to allow for a mandatory medical evaluation. Over the next 2 months, 5 independent specialists were brought in to assess Anna's mental health. Their findings were conclusive. Anna was suffering from drug-induced psychosis combined with antisocial personality disorder and severe emotional dysregulation. Based on those results, the court ruled in February 2021 to have Anna committed involuntarily to a psychiatric facility. Since then, she has been held at a secure mental health institution for high-risk individuals in Moldova. But the impact of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. The story exploded on social media, triggering heated debates and public outrage. One of the most controversial issues was the legal loophole that prevents life sentences for women in Moldova. While protecting vulnerable populations is vital in a civilized society, critics questioned whether this principle, when applied rigidly to crimes devoid of humanity, might be a sign that justice itself is eroding. And just as the dust was beginning to settle in Moldova, another tragedy shocked the Philippines. At exactly 3 p.m. on December 10th, a teacher named Cruz Magwad was in the middle of class at a high school in Cotabato when he received a frantic call from an acquaintance. His home had been broken into, and everything inside had been destroyed. Without hesitation, Cruz left the school and rushed home. Fear and dread overwhelmed him, especially because it was still early in the afternoon, and his 2 children were definitely home alone. But that uneasy feeling quickly turned into sheer horror. When Cruz Magwad arrived at his front gate, he found the front door locked and the entire house eerily silent. He rushed around to the backyard, where there was a secondary entrance through the kitchen, and immediately ran inside. What he saw stopped him cold. His eldest daughter, Crystal Gwyn, just 18 years old, was lying motionless in the middle of the living room, covered in blood. Not far from her body, her skin showed clear signs of violent assault, deep cuts and heavy bruising all over. Nearby, her younger brother, Crystal Lewis, 16, was found bound and gagged, his body drenched in blood. Scattered around the crime scene were broken glass bottles, a hammer, and a bloodied baseball bat. As Magwad stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, a strange noise echoed from the second floor. No one appeared. He called out desperate, calling for his daughter by name. Moments later, a voice responded from upstairs. It was Janice, also 16. She appeared physically unharmed, but was visibly shaken and trembling. The moment she saw her father, she ran straight into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Janice would turn out to be the sole survivor and key witness to this horrific crime. According to her testimony, just 10 minutes before the attack, at around 2 p.m., the 3 siblings had been home alone when 3 unidentified men broke into the house. The intruders first attacked Lewis near the front door. Then they began ransacking the house as if searching for something specific. Moments later, they charged at her older sister. Crazzle Gwyn's terrified screams echoed through the house as she fought back in vain during the brutal onslaught. Janice, witnessing everything, immediately realized the gravity of the danger. In a panic, she ran to the bedroom and crawled under the bed to hide. One by one, the intruders opened every door, but strangely they never checked under the bed. Thanks to that, Janice miraculously survived. By around 3 p.m., she quietly turned on her phone and logged into Facebook to call for help. She posted a desperate message saying that intruders were in the house, that she was hiding, and that she feared for her life. Her pleas spread quickly on social media, and police were alerted just in time. Almost simultaneously with the police being notified, Janice's father arrived at the house just minutes before law enforcement. After securing the scene, investigators immediately began questioning the surviving witness. Janice explained that the three intruders appeared to be searching for valuables as every drawer, bookshelf, and hidden corner of the house had been turned upside down. But what raised immediate red flags for police was this. Only one item was missing: Gwyn's cell phone. The sheer brutality of the attack, combined with the fact that nothing else was stolen, led detectives to suspect that this was not a robbery, but rather a targeted, premeditated murder. As investigators dug deeper, the evidence began to support their initial suspicions. A formal investigation was launched. At the crime scene, police discovered a disturbing detail. The perpetrators had showered in the home after committing the murders. In the laundry room, investigators found signs that underwear and pants had been changed. All the clues led to an even more shocking revelation. After the killings, the suspects had taken time to clean themselves, stuffed the bloodied clothing into a plastic bag, and threw it into a nearby river. Fortunately, the bag got caught on a tree branch near the riverbank and didn't drift too far, allowing authorities to recover critical physical evidence. Amid rising public outrage, the brutal murder of the Magwad siblings quickly became a national media sensation in the Philippines. The government responded by forming a special investigative task force and bringing in criminal profiling experts. A significant monetary reward was also offered to encourage citizens to come forward with tips. Thanks to these swift actions, public interest surged. On social media, the hashtag #NumberJustice for Magwad siblings began trending nationwide as thousands of users shared details of the case and theories about who might be behind such a heinous crime. As speculation grew, one name drew the most attention: Janice, the sole survivor of the massacre. Suspicion intensified when it was revealed that Janice was adopted and not biologically related to Gwyn and Louis Magwad, the biological children of Cruz Magwad and his wife. Janice came from a troubled background. She lost both parents at a young age and grew up without family support or stability. In her early teens, she worked as a babysitter for relatives of the Magwad family. That's how she gradually got to know and bond with the household. Because she was close in age to Gwyn, the two girls quickly became friends. They often made TikTok videos together and bonded over shared teenage experiences and interests. Through this connection, Janice became a familiar and trusted presence in the Magwad home. One day during a casual conversation with their daughter, Cruz and his wife learned about Janice's difficult circumstances. A bright student, working to support herself entirely on her own at such a young age, moved them deeply. Out of compassion, they initially decided to support her financially for a period of time. Over time, the bond between Janice and the family grew stronger. In July 2021, just 5 months before the murders, the Magwads made the decision to legally adopt her. This move was largely inspired by Gwyn, who had always considered Janice a sister and had pleaded with her parents to welcome her into the family. Of course, this wasn't a decision made on impulse. The parents had observed Janice for years, gradually developing trust and sympathy for the hardships she had endured. After careful consideration, they officially registered her as a member of the household. Because of this, when the murders occurred, Janice's status as an adopted child quickly became a source of public outrage. At the time, the Philippine Special Investigation Unit publicly declared that she was a victim, not a suspect. Yet, social media platforms were flooded with baseless accusations claiming she was the killer. The government was forced to step in, issuing a formal statement emphasizing that no one should be accused of a crime without official evidence or a legal conclusion. In the aftermath of that heartbreaking tragedy, the emotional bond between Janice and her adoptive parents grew stronger than ever. Even though she had only been adopted 5 months prior, and had never once called them mom or dad, the three embraced in tears. Through sobs, Janice spoke the words for the first time, calling them Dad and Mom, and promised to stay by their side to help them get through the pain. However, as the investigation expanded, suspicion around Janice intensified. Her statements didn't match the crime scene. One red flag stood out in particular. At the very moment Cruz Magwad returned home, Janice had just stepped out of the bathroom, a detail eerily consistent with the forensic theory that the killer had showered after the murders. This strange coincidence raised immediate doubts. In her statement, Janice claimed she heard strange noises, realized something terrible was happening, and hid under the bed in fear. But when her father arrived, she emerged from the bathroom instead. When questioned, she said she was so terrified and shaken that she tried to calm herself down by taking a shower. But that wasn't the only inconsistency. Her testimony about the sequence of the killings also troubled investigators. Janice claimed that Louis, the younger brother, was attacked first near the entryway. However, the autopsy results and forensic evidence painted a different picture. Specifically, among the two siblings, Gwyn was determined to have died first. Her body showed early signs of decomposition, including inactivity. Meanwhile, Louis's body was still clean, without any such signs indicating that he died after his sister. Resolve these contradictions, investigators refocused their attention entirely on Janice. In December 2021, her legal status was officially changed from witness to suspect. During interrogation, Janice lowered her head and confessed, admitting that she was the one who murdered both Gwyn and Louis. As the investigation delved deeper into her personal life, Janice's psychological issues became more apparent. Despite gaining a new home and family, she struggled to share emotional space. Janice became increasingly jealous whenever her adoptive parents showed affection toward their biological children, even though by all accounts, they had treated her fairly and equally. But for Janice, fairness wasn't enough. She wanted exclusive love. Her inner resentment kept building. She believed that because she wasn't their biological daughter, and his wife saw her as an outsider, leaving her with a deep sense of not truly belonging. That pain turned into anger and a desperate longing for validation. Janice threw herself into academics, hoping that getting high grades would finally earn her the attention and love she craved from her adoptive parents. But that goal was far from easy. Both Cruz and his wife were school teachers, and their children, Gwyn and Louis, had been raised with rigorous educational discipline from a young age. No matter how hard Janice tried, she could never quite match their level. One day, Janice decided to create a situation that would draw attention from her adoptive parents. She knew that Cruz and his wife often kept spare cash in a small jar in their bedroom in case their children needed emergency money while they were away. To carry out her plan, Janice stole $175 from the jar, then broke the bedroom window to stage a fake break-in. She rushed to her adoptive mother, claiming that she had discovered a burglary in progress. While it might have looked like a theft in reality, her true motive was simple. She wanted to become the center of attention in the family. But her plan unraveled quickly. Gwyn happened to check Janice's bag and found the missing money. The entire scheme was exposed. Once the lie came to light, Janice lashed out at Gwyn and Louis, saying that if it weren't for them, their parents would give her all their love and attention. Soon after, authorities began looking into Janice's background, and what they found was alarming. She had lied about her past. Janice had claimed to be an orphan, with both parents dead. But in reality, her biological family was alive and living on Mindanao Island, Philippines. She even had 3 siblings, and the name Janice wasn't even her real name. It was one she made up. Janice was not an orphan, as she had claimed. Her parents had divorced when she was young, and she ran away from home by choice. She built a narrative that painted her as a tragic, abandoned child, perhaps all part of a calculated plan to get adopted. But when the murders happened, Janice wasn't acting alone. She had recruited 2 acquaintances, one of whom was her boyfriend, Esmeraldo Kennedy Jr. The 3 of them planned and executed the murders together, using knives and a baseball bat to brutally kill Gwyn and Louis. The crime shocked the nation, and the trial became a major event in the Philippines. After overwhelming evidence and witness testimonies were presented in court, Janice was sentenced to 17 years in prison for the murder of Gwyn, and another 17 years for the murder of Louis. A total of 34 years behind bars. Her 2 accomplices received similar sentences handed down by the court. 2 horrific crimes, 2 different countries, but one chilling pattern. Young women entering loving households, searching for warmth and belonging, only for it all to end in bloodshed. One killed her biological mother. The other murdered the who welcomed her as family. At first, both appeared to be vulnerable girls in need of compassion. But in the end, they became the ones who destroyed the very people who trusted and cared for them. What they committed weren't just murders, they were acts of profound betrayal against bonds built on love. Story 5. It's March 29, 1989, in the city of Tokyo, Japan. The air was heavy, with gray clouds hanging low over the skyline. Near the edges of the city, where the bustling streets faded into quieter industrial zones, a group of officers from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department arrived at a barren construction site in Koto City. The officers didn't find themselves here by chance. Earlier that day, a suspect in custody had confessed to something horrific, a crime that had led them to this desolate lot. His instructions were vague. Search for a metal drum near the edge of the construction site, one that was filled with concrete. The officers moved cautiously through the site, their search guided by the chilling confession. Their eyes scanned the ground, picking through piles of rubble and debris. Then one of them stops. His gaze locks on a rusted drum, partially buried beneath the dirt. Its surface is streaked with grime, the metal corroded and pitted, being exposed to the elements. The officer crouches down, brushing away the loose earth with gloved hands. The drum, though battered by time, feels out of place. Its weight, its position. It doesn't look like something discarded at random. The two officers exchange a glance. One of them then reaches out, hesitates, then taps the drum lightly with his hand. The hollow sound that echoes back sent chills down their spines. Immediately, one of them steps back, his breath catching as the realization settles in. This was what they were here for. Inside this concrete drum were the remains of a girl who had been missing for months. Her name was Junko Furuta, a 17-year-old whose disappearance had left her family and community in anguish. But this drum contained more than just her body. It held the truth of a crime, so vile it defied human comprehension. For more than 40 agonizing days, Junko Furuta endured a relentless cycle of abuse and violence. She was stripped of her humanity and left to suffer unimaginable pain at the hands of 4 people. But this wasn't the work of seasoned criminals. In fact, the people who had inflicted such brutality on her were teenage boys. They didn't stop with physical abuse. They humiliated her, forced her into unthinkable acts, and even invited others to participate in her suffering. Dozens of people knew what was happening. Some of them watched, while others actively participated in her torment. Yet, not a single person stepped forward to intervene. But the most devastating truth was that Junko had come so painfully close to rescue. The police had actually arrived at the very house where she was being held captive. But instead of checking further, the officers turned away, believing the lies they were told. What happened to 17-year-old Junko Furuta was not just a murder. It was a harrowing glimpse into the depths of human cruelty and the apathy of a society that turned its back when she needed help the most. This is a story that continues to haunt those who hear it, not just because of the horrors that the 17-year-old endured, but for the deafening silence of those who knew what was happening, but chose to look the other way. You're listening to a special edition episode of Haynes, produced by One Up Media. This episode may contain sensitive details and graphic imagery. Listener discretion is advised. Junko Furuta was born on January 18, 1971, in Misato, a small city in Saitama Prefecture, Japan. Nestled on the outskirts of Tokyo, Misato was a quiet, unassuming town where life moved at a steady pace, unbothered by the clamor of the nearby metropolis. It was in this setting that Junko spent her formative years, growing up in a modest home with her parents and 2 brothers. An older brother, who often acted as a protector, and a younger brother, who looked up to her with admiration. From a young age, Junko exhibited a quiet determination and a sense of responsibility that made her seem wiser and more mature than her age. Her teachers at Yasho Minami High School often spoke of her as an exemplary student, dedicated, focused, and rarely absent. She excelled academically and earned the respect of her classmates for her ability to balance her studies with her personal goals. Outside the classroom, Junko was equally driven. In October 1988, she took on a part-time job at a plastic molding factory. Working held a deep significance for her. She likely recognized the hard work her parents had put into raising her, and she wanted to do her part to ease their burden in any way she could. Her dreams extended beyond her small town. Junko had aspirations of becoming an idol singer, a profession that connected her love for music with her desire to inspire others. Though she kept these dreams mostly to herself, Those closest to her knew how deeply she cherished the idea of standing on a stage, bringing joy to others through her voice. Like any teenager, Junko faced the usual challenges of adolescence, navigating friendships and school life. But she handled them with quiet strength and resilience. To her family, she was their source of pride. To her friends, someone you could trust. And to herself, a girl with big dreams and the drive to make them come true. For 17 years, her life was one of hope and potential, a future waiting to unfold. We know that life can be unpredictable, but what happened to Junko next was beyond anything anyone could have imagined. On the evening of November 25, 1988, 18-year-old Hiroshi Miyano and 16-year-old Shinji Minato were cruising through the quiet streets of Misato on their motorcycles. Records state that both teenagers were high school dropouts with several run-ins with the law at the time. Miyano, at 18, exuded a sense of authority. Bolstered by his connections to the Yakuza, these ties fueled his arrogance, giving him a reputation as someone untouchable. Meanwhile, his 16-year-old accomplice, Minato, often took on the role of a follower, obediently carrying out Miyano's orders without hesitation. That night, their intent was as dark as the roads they traveled, robbing and preying on unsuspecting women. As they prowled the area, their eyes scanned for a target, searching for someone vulnerable, someone they could overpower. A couple miles away from where the two boys were, Junko Furuta had just finished her shift at the plastic factory. It was late, and the cool November air brushed against her face as she pedaled her bicycle through the familiar streets. The route home was one she knew by heart. Each turn she made was a reminder of her routine. The day had been tiring, but it was worth it. She was one step closer to her dreams, and as she made her way home, her thoughts likely wandered to the graduation trip she had been saving so diligently for. It was this sense of purpose that kept her going, even on days when exhaustion crept in. Unbeknownst to Junko, her path would soon intersect with Miyano and Minato, and her world would take an unimaginable turn. From a distance, Miyano spotted her, a lone girl on her bicycle, heading home. She was exactly the kind of target they were looking for. Acting on Miyano's orders, Minato accelerated his motorcycle, swerving close enough to kick Junko off her bicycle. The sudden impact sent her crashing to the ground, her belongings scattering, as the two sped off into the shadows. But Miyano didn't leave. Instead, he circled back, slowing to a stop near the scene. With Junko still on the floor, he approached her. Appearing concerned, he offered to walk her home, a gesture that seemed kind and protective. Perhaps still shaking and vulnerable from the sudden fall, Junko accepted his offer. However, as they walked, Miyano subtly guided Junko away from her usual route, leading her toward a desolate area, where an abandoned warehouse loomed in the shadows. Junko, still reeling from the earlier attack, likely felt unease creeping in, as her surroundings became less familiar. She might have hesitated, her steps slowing, but Miyano's calm demeanor offered a sense of reassurance. Once they reached the warehouse, the atmosphere shifted sharply. Miyano's mask of concern dropped, replaced by a cold and menacing presence. His posture stiffened, and his tone turned sharp and commanding. Turning to Junko, Miyano claimed that he was a member of the Yakuza, and if she refused to follow his orders, she would face severe consequences. Trapped and powerless, Junko's options vanished before her. She was alone, far from the safety of her home, and in the clutches of someone whose intentions were anything but kind. Fearing for her life, she had no choice but to comply. The moments that followed marked the beginning of a harrowing ordeal that would strip away her freedom, her dignity, and eventually her life. After luring Junko into his control, Miyano hailed a taxi and took her to a hotel in Adachi. There, away from any prying eyes, Miyano launched his assault. He raped her repeatedly, exploiting her vulnerability and isolation. In that confined space, Junko was left entirely at his mercy. After committing the assault, Miyano made a call to a man named Joe Ogura, one of his closest accomplices. Over the phone, he boasted about what he had done, describing the events in detail. Disturbingly, Ogura was excited to hear about this and encouraged Miyano to take things further. He advised him not to release Junko, citing the potential consequences if he were to let her go. He then contacted his other accomplices, Minato and Yasushi Watanabe, to inform them of the situation. Together, the four boys began devising a plan that would become one of the most harrowing crimes in Japan's history. Several moments later, in the early morning hours of November 26th, Miyano led Junko to a park near the hotel. However, Ogura, Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe were already there waiting. Using their knowledge of her home address as leverage, they threatened that the Yakuza would harm her family if she disobeyed their orders, and warned that she would face unimaginable consequences if she even considered escaping. Once again, Junko, terrified and powerless, had no choice but to comply. As the group stood in the park, there must have been a brief but deliberate discussion about what to do with her next. Releasing her wasn't an option. Ogura had already made it clear that she couldn't be allowed to leave, and the group knew full well the consequences of her going to the authorities. Instead, the conversation shifted to how they could keep her under their control. The boys, emboldened by their twisted intentions, agreed that Junko would be kept for their continued pleasure. But they needed a place, somewhere secure and away from prying eyes. It was then that Minato offered up his family's home in Adachi. The second-floor room, he said, would provide the privacy they needed to carry out their plans without interruption. With the decision made, Junko was quickly brought to Minato's house. She would remain there for the next 42 days, trapped within those walls. Every single day, she was subjected to unspeakable torment, and her life was now dictated entirely by the cruel and twisted desires of her captors. Meanwhile, a day after Junko had not returned home, her parents had become overcome with worry and filed a missing persons report to the police. It had been 2 full days since their daughter failed to return home, and their concern had grown into fear. Junko wasn't the type to disappear without explanation, and her sudden absence left her family desperate for answers. However, her captors had already learned about the police report and moved quickly. They forced Junko to make a phone call to her mother, not just once, but 3 separate times. On each call, she was forced to assure her family that she had left voluntarily and was staying safely with friends. On the other end of the line, her parents were likely grappling with confusion and disbelief. The Junko they knew would never run away. She was responsible, dependable, and deeply connected to her family. Yet, as much as they wanted to dismiss the possibility, the calls planted a seed of doubt. Could this really be her choice? Was there something they didn't know? Despite these lingering uncertainties, their anxiety and worry for their daughter remained constant. As the situation still felt far from normal, the final call ended with a devastating blow. Under duress, Junko was forced to tell her mother to stop the investigation entirely. It was a cruel manipulation, and for Junko, the act of delivering those words must have been heartbreaking. Surrounded by her captors in an unfamiliar, hostile environment, she had no choice but to betray the very people who were her greatest source of love and safety. In that moment, Junko likely felt a deep, crushing despair. What might have been her only hope had been torn away. With the investigation out of the way, at least for now, the boys realized that they had to strengthen their cover so as to not raise any alarm in the house. Hence, when Minato's parents were present in the house, they instructed Junko to act as though she was Minato's girlfriend. Forced into this charade, she played the role under threat, but her every move was carefully watched by the boys. Minato's parents, initially believing the ruse, did not question her presence. But as days turned into weeks, it was getting harder to ignore that something terrible was happening in Minato's room. Strange noises, muffled cries, heavy thuds, and whispered conversations echoed from behind the closed door of Minato's room, often late into the night. The boys themselves came and went with alarming frequency, sometimes accompanied by other friends. Yet, the door to the second-floor room remained tightly shut. But what was going on inside? The story of Junko Furuta is considered to be one of the most horrifying criminal cases in modern history, and what you're about to hear is an account of the next 42 days of her nightmare. Please be advised that some of the details may be deeply unsettling. When Junko was first brought to the room, the 4 boys, Hiroshi Mayano, Joe Ogura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe, had already begun to subject her to relentless abuse. Within those 4 walls, Junko was repeatedly raped and beaten. However, the assaults were not limited to the initial 4 boys. They had invited others to join in the abuse. Over the course of her captivity, it is estimated that as many as 100 individuals were aware of Junko's imprisonment, and several of them had participated in her suffering. Reports suggest that she was subjected to sexual assault over 400 times during the 42 days she was held captive. On the night of November 28th, the brutality inflicted upon her had immediately escalated to unimaginable levels. That night, the 4 boys had invited 2 additional individuals, Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ahara, to join them in their acts of cruelty. Within the confines of Minato's room, Junko was subjected to a horrifying gang rape, with each of the 6 boys taking turns assaulting her. Immediately after the assault, the boys sought new ways to humiliate and degrade her further. Reports state that Minato took a razor blade and shaved her pubic hair. And if this wasn't enough, he then used a lit match to burn her genital area, causing excruciating pain, and leaving her with severe burns. Whenever Junko resisted their attacks or attempted to escape, the boys responded with violence. They burned her legs with lighters and dripped hot wax on her face. There were also multiple occasions where they inserted foreign objects into her body, including bottles and metal rods, causing severe internal injuries. There were days when as many as 12 individuals would assault her in a single day. Humiliation became a constant companion, as she was forced to remain naked for extended periods. Her vulnerability treated as a source of entertainment by her captors. Some of her abusers even urinated on her, and she was compelled to perform explicit acts for their amusement. She was beaten daily with golf clubs, iron rods, bamboo sticks, and other objects. Dumbbells were constantly dropped onto her body, and her head was repeatedly stomped against the ground. Hot wax was dripped onto her face, especially on her eyelids, which were also burned with cigarettes and lighters. She was deprived of proper food and water, often forced to eat cockroaches and drink her own urine to survive. Her captors even inserted fireworks into her private parts, causing severe burns and damage. In one horrifying incident, one of the boys had grabbed a pair of pliers and tore off her left nipple. In addition to this, she was at times suspended from the ceiling and used as a punching bag. She was also shoved into a freezer and left there for hours. Sewing needles were stabbed into her breasts and left embedded in her skin. Cigarettes and lighters were used to burn her genitals, and in one of the most horrific acts, a lit light bulb was inserted into her body until it shattered. By the end of her ordeal, her face was so swollen and damaged that her features were no longer discernible. Her body emitted the stench of infection and decay as her wounds festered. She was left bleeding heavily from the repeated assaults, wheezing as she struggled to breathe due to blood clogging her sinuses. On New Year's Day in 1989, Junko was unable to move, her body broken and her spirit crushed. She begged her captors to end her suffering, pleading for death as the only escape from her torment. However, they refused. As the weeks of captivity took their toll on Junko, the extent of her injuries and the deterioration of her appearance began to affect even her captors. The boys no longer found her attractive. Driven by their insatiable cruelty, they turned their focus elsewhere. Using the same strategy that had lured Junko into their clutches, they targeted another unsuspecting victim, a 19-year-old woman on her way home from work. They employed a calculated plan to isolate her, preying on her vulnerability, and proceeded to gang rape her. Not much is known about her identity or what happened to her immediately following the attack. But unlike Junko, this second victim was not held captive. After enduring a horrifying assault, she was freed and allowed to leave. 3 days later, on January 4th, 1989, the boys were bored and forced Junko to play a game of mahjong. Despite her condition, she managed to win the game, which enraged the boys. Their retaliation was swift and brutal. Mayano began by igniting a candle and allowing the hot wax to drip onto Junko's face. He then grabbed her and placed 2 shortened candles on her eyelids, letting the wax drip down and into her eye sockets. At one point, they lifted her and kicked her with such force that she fell onto a stereo unit. The impact triggered violent convulsions, her body responding to the overwhelming trauma it had endured. Seeing this, the boys began to panic. Desperate to regain control of the situation, they decided to escalate their brutality. To avoid staining their hands with her blood, they covered their hands with plastic bags and proceeded to beat her savagely. Then, they dropped an iron exercise ball repeatedly onto her abdomen, causing catastrophic internal injuries. But this was not enough for Mayano. He wanted to take the violence even further. Grabbing a bottle of lighter fluid, he poured it all over Junko's body and set fire with a match. Junko made several weak attempts to extinguish the flames, but her strength was completely depleted after weeks of torture. Eventually, the fire raged on, and she stopped moving. Around 10 a.m. on January 4th, 1989, her 42-day ordeal of unimaginable suffering and cruelty had ended. Less than a day later, they devised a plan to dispose of her body in a way that they believed would ensure it was never discovered. They began wrapping her body in blankets, and then placed it inside a large travel bag. This bag was then transported to a construction site in Koto, Tokyo, where they had acquired a 55-gallon metal drum. Using quick-drying concrete, they filled the drum and encased her body inside. Once the drum was sealed, they abandoned it in a vacant lot at the construction site. For nearly 3 months, Junko's body remained hidden in the drum, her family unaware of her fate, and her captors continuing with their lives as though nothing had happened. Unsurprisingly, Mayano and his accomplices continued their criminal behavior, engaging in theft and assault. But sometime in early 1989, Mayano and Ogura, both emboldened by their earlier crimes, were arrested in connection with the abduction and gang rape of a 19-year-old woman in December 1988. This was the same victim they had assaulted, while Junko was still being held captive in Minato's room. During police questioning, Mayano made a slip of the tongue. Believing that Ogura had already confessed to Junko's murder, he panicked and revealed the location of the drum, thinking that his involvement was already known. When police investigated the site Mayano described, they found the drum exactly as he had said, partially buried among construction debris. Inside, they uncovered the concrete and case remains of Junko Furuta. This discovery shocked the investigators. The discovery of Junko Furuda's remains was a turning point in the investigation. Once the drum was retrieved and its horrifying contents revealed, the scope of the boy's cruelty became clear. For Junko's mother, the revelation was unbearable. Overcome with grief and shock, she fainted upon hearing the extent of her daughter's suffering. Her mental state deteriorated rapidly, and she required a long-term stay in a psychiatric hospital to cope with the trauma. As part of the investigation, an autopsy was conducted on Junko's remains. According to the report, small glass bottles were found still lodged in her rectal cavity, and it was also discovered that she was pregnant throughout the abuse despite the severe damage to her uterus. Additionally, her face was so mutilated from the repeated assaults that investigators had to rely on her fingerprints to confirm her identity. Following the discovery of the body and the disturbing details from the autopsy, the police moved swiftly to ensure that those responsible faced justice. Mayano's confession had set the wheels in motion, and the police expanded their investigation to include his accomplices, Joe Ogura, Shinji Minato, Yasushi Watanabe, and any others who had participated in the crimes. The arrest of the boys swiftly followed, and the news sent shockwaves through their communities. Friends, neighbors, and even their families struggled to connect the horrific acts with the young men they thought they knew. Police say that over 100 people were believed to have known about Junko's captivity, with some directly participating in the abuse. And yet, no one had come forward to help her. The media quickly picked up on the case, dubbing it as the concrete-encased high school girl murder. The details and the sheer length of Junko's ordeal drew national and international attention. Public outrage quickly erupted, with many demanding harsh punishment for the perpetrators and questioning how such acts of inhumanity could have occurred without any intervention. In the weeks following the arrests, the defendants were brought before the court. Because all the main suspects were minors at the time of the crime, their identities were initially protected under Japanese law. However, investigative journalists argued that the severity of their actions stripped them of any right to anonymity. This debate on whether or not to publish their names became a significant point of controversy at the time. But ultimately, it became irrelevant as their names and photographs were published anyways. During the trial, the prosecution sought life sentences for the main offenders, emphasizing the calculated and prolonged nature of Junko's suffering. Meanwhile, the defense argued that the boys' actions were influenced by immaturity and a lack of guidance, urging the court to consider rehabilitation over retribution. For Junko's family, attending the trial was a relentless reminder of the suffering she endured. Her parents listened in anguish as the prosecutors detailed the physical and psychological torment inflicted on their daughter. Her mother, already fragile from the grief, often had to leave the courtroom, unable to bear the descriptions of what Junko had faced. The legal proceedings also revealed the roles of Minato's parents, who admitted they had been aware of something amiss, but claimed they were too afraid of their son and his friends to intervene. But as the trial unfolded, it became clear that justice, even at its harshest, could never truly atone for what had happened to Junko. In July 1990, all 4 boys were found guilty by the Tokyo District Court for several charges. These include abduction for the purpose of sexual assault, confinement, rape, assault, murder, and the abandonment of a corpse. However, the sentences they received sparked outrage across Japan. Hiroshi Mayano, the ringleader, was initially sentenced to 17 years in prison. He then tried to appeal this verdict, but in response, 20 years. His parents were also ordered to pay 50 million yen, or approximately 350,000 US dollars at the time, to Junko's family as compensation. Joe Ogura, the boy who told Mayano not to let Junko leave in the first place, was sentenced to a term of 5 to 10 years and ultimately served the maximum duration of 10 years. Yasushi Watanabe received a sentence ranging from 5 to 7 years and served the full 7 years. The last boy, Shinji Minato, was handed a sentence of 5 to 9 years. For many, these punishments seemed alarmingly lenient given the extent of the crimes. The lighter sentences were a result of Japan's juvenile justice system, which prioritizes rehabilitation over retribution for offenders under the age of 20. However, this leniency was met with widespread backlash. Critics argued that the severity of the crime far exceeded what the juvenile justice system was designed to handle. The courtroom was inundated with letters and calls demanding harsher sentences, with many expressing disbelief that the perpetrators could one day walk free. The public's anger extended beyond the courtroom. Vigils and protests were held, calling for reforms to the juvenile justice system. Junko's case became a symbol of the inadequacies in addressing violent crimes committed by minors. For her family and supporters, no amount of punishment seemed sufficient to truly reflect the suffering that she endured. Despite the sentences, the release dates of the boys came all too soon for many. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, all four had completed their terms. Yasushi Watanabe was released in 1996. Upon leaving prison, he left his hometown to live with his mother. Shinji Minato was released from prison in 1998 and went on to live with his mother. But in 2018, he was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. The incident occurred on a street in Kawaguchi, Saitama, where Minato struck a 32-year-old man in the shoulder with a metal baton and slashed his neck with a knife during a dispute over a parking space. In 2019, he was sentenced to a year and 6 months in prison, with the sentence suspended and probation imposed for 3 years. Joe Ogura was released from prison in 1999 and subsequently changed his last name to Kamasaku. After his release, he briefly worked in IT, but eventually became involved in organized crime after his past crimes became widely known. In 2004, he was arrested for assaulting Takatoshi Isono, a friend he suspected of being romantically involved with his own girlfriend. Ogura forced Isono into the trunk of his car and transported him to his mother's bar in Misato, where he brutally assaulted him for 4 hours. For this crime, Ogura was sentenced to 4 years in prison and was released in 2009. As for the ringleader, Hiroshi Mayano, his parents were left with no choice but to sell their family home in order to provide the compensation of 50 million yen to Junko Furuta's family. After his release in 2009, he changed his last name to Yokoyama. However, it seems that little else about the man has changed. In 2013, he was arrested on suspicion of bank fraud and orchestrating scam telephone calls. But despite the allegations, he refused to cooperate with the authorities and was ultimately not charged. Today, all 4 of the boys who played a role in the unspeakable crimes against Junko Furuta walk free, living their lives beyond the prison walls that once confined them. Furuta's funeral was held on April 2, 1989. It was a day heavy with grief as friends, family and classmates gathered to say goodbye to a girl who had been taken from them in the most unimaginable way. Among the mourners, one of Junko's friends stood up to deliver a eulogy, a message that was written collectively by her classmates from school. Their words were a tribute to the vibrant life that she had lived and a sorrowful acknowledgement of the cruelty she had endured. Here's an excerpt of that eulogy. Junchan, welcome back. I never dreamed we would meet again like this. You were subjected to such cruelty, weren't you? You went through so much, didn't you? I'm upset with myself that I went on living unaware of what was happening. You were always so gentle and cheerful, Junchan. The Japanese coat we made for the cultural festival looked wonderful on you. I'll never forget that. We will absolutely not let Junchan's death be in vain. As we step into adulthood, we'll strive for a world where such heinous crimes no longer exist. We'll do our best keeping Junchan in our hearts and pushing forward. The principal even brought your diploma. Thanks to this, all 47 of us in Class 3 were able to graduate. Junchan, there's no more pain or suffering now. Rest peacefully. Farewell, Junchan.